Chapter 4503. Even if I can help you, I'm afraid we don't have enough time. Suji's face also showed disappointment as he replied bitterly, "It will take too long for your star shuttle to rush into the spatial mezzanine. I'm afraid we won't be able to find the real palace door. The palace door of the Star Moon Palace has already closed." What? Xiao Hua was shocked again. How long will the palace door of the Star Moon Palace last? Why didn't you say so earlier? Suji did not explain to him. He only said, 2 hours at most, half an hour at least. Oh, there's still time. Xiao Hua nodded and asked again, "If this junior can find the general area, senior will be able to activate the star shuttle, right?" You can determine the general area? Fairy Xing Yu was overjoyed. This junior will try. Xiao Hua nodded. However, this junior can't guarantee it. Xiao Hua, you are indeed our savior. Fairy Xing Yu shouted. Suji, your divination technique is really accurate. Seniors, get ready, Xiao Hua said in a low voice as he looked around. On the entire Crimson Ground River, tens of thousands of humans and demons were watching the three of them perform a one-man show. By the way, senior, you can also ask the 4 great families and the great demons to think of a way. We can't always be the vanguard. Xiao Hua thought of a way to distract them and whispered to Fairy Xing Yu. Fairy Xing Yu nodded and said, "Yes, they used to follow Zhai Xing Lu and drink soup. Now, let them do something." After saying that, Fairy Xing Yu flew up into the sky and sent a voice transmission to the 4 great families, the Confucian cultivators, and the great demons of the demon clan. Xiao Hua nodded at Suji, and the two of them flew closer to the spatial mezzanine. Suji waved his hand, and the exploded star shuttle was restored. The dim starlight fell into his hand. Xiao Hua stopped and turned his head to look. Under Fairy Xing Yu's voice transmission, the 4 great families and the Confucian cultivators were also a little flustered. They gathered together to discuss, while the great demons of the demon clan rushed into the mezzanine one after another. They each found a direction and activated their innate divine abilities, trying to find the real palace door. "Senior," Xiao Hua whispered, "please protect this junior. I don't want others to see my divine abilities." All right. Without another word, Suji raised his arms high into the sky and spread his 5 fingers. Like a peacock spreading its tail, lightning immediately enveloped the surrounding hundreds of miles. Inside the thunder, Xiao Hua slapped his forehead. A ghostly green light flashed and the delusion breaker eye slowly opened. Hiss! Xiao Hua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he saw everything through the illusion breaker eye. In front of Xiao Hua's eyes was an incomparably huge golden color. This golden color made Xiao Hua's delirium transcendence eye sour. Within the golden light, an irregular orange hole that looked like a hole was slowly moving. The orange hole radiated a tricolored flow. This flow was like a spring rushing into a grayish-black flowing wave. The flowing wave was shaking violently. Clusters of green and silver flashed constantly. The tricolored flow created a faintly discernible passageway in the flowing wave, and then dissipated within the flowing wave. "Over there," Xiao Hua whispered to Suji. However, the illusory image of the palace door is changing from time to time. All right. Suji's face was still calm as he replied via voice transmission, "As long as you can roughly determine the range." After saying that, Suji turned around and sent a voice transmission to Fairy Xing Yu. Fairy Xing Yu was currently saying something to the Shiman family. She did not expect Xiao Hua to be able to determine the location in such a short period of time. Therefore, without another word, she immediately teleported to Xiao Hua's side. Fairy Xing Yu's actions naturally attracted the attention of the 4 great families. While they were discussing, they were also watching the movements of Xiao Hua and the others. Suji sent a voice transmission to Fairy Xing Yu. The two of them exchanged opinions, and then led Xiao Hua to the location of the illusory image of the palace door. At this moment, some great demons of the demon clan had already begun to force their way into the spatial mezzanine. There were also some Confucian families and heavenly kings of the Buddhist sect who had made preparations. They activated their imperial equipment or heavenly eyes to explore the spatial mezzanine. They saw the illusory image of the palace door. At this time, because the Star Moon Palace had moved again, There were already more than 10,000 illusory images of the palace door within 100 miles. Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, Senior Su, please continue to protect me. I will activate my divine ability first. After I have some clues, can you activate your magic treasure? No need. Suji shook his head and said, Save your magic power first. There are still places in the Star Moon Palace that need your help. Here, according to our previous discussion, Fairy Xingyu and I will take action. Yes, Suji is right. Fairy Xingyu also nodded and said, There are many places that rely on the power of thunder. It's better for you to save your strength. With that, Fairy Xingyu nodded at Suji and said, You go first. I will activate it later. Let's find the right palace door first. Xiaohua hurriedly sent a voice transmission, Fairy. Just follow the direction I know. There's no need to search anymore. What? This time, even Suji was shocked. Your divine ability can actually see through the space that is close to chaos? It seems like it. Xiaohua nodded. Seeing that a few heavenly kings from the Buddhist sect were also coming over, he said, Let's hurry up and take action. Otherwise, the Buddhist sect will take the lead. All right. Suji nodded. He raised his hand and took out a broken beast-shaped jade piece. The beast shape looked similar to the Luna beast in the Bright Moon Palace. However, it was broken, and one could not see its full appearance. Suji opened his mouth, and a water-blue thunderbolt fell into the jade piece. The entire jade piece emitted a blue brilliance. Boom! The moonlight that had originally fallen into the Star Moon Palace split into a pillar of moonlight and fell into the jade piece. Then, a broken outline of the Luna beast appeared in front of Xiaohua. It is indeed the Luna beast. Xiaohua understood. Suji explained, This is an ancient relic I obtained when I was patrolling the borders of a forbidden area. I don't know its specific power, but I can barely activate the moonlight within it. Xingyue, come and lend me a hand. Once Xiaohua confirms the correct phantom image of the palace door, we will connect this pillar of starlight to that phantom image. If that's the case, Fairy Xingyu bit her lip and said softly, Won't the people from the 4 aristocratic families take advantage of us again? The Star Moon Palace was meant for them to take advantage of us. Suji scolded without holding back. Furthermore, at this point, why are you still thinking about this? There. Since he was not afraid of others taking advantage of them, Xiaohua did not hide it anymore. He raised his hand and pointed at the spot where the tricolored brilliance had disappeared. Fairy Xingyu looked over. Indeed, there were several palace door shadows at the place where Xiaohua had pointed. Fairy Xingyu's face turned solemn. She slowly formed a seal with both hands. Layers of mist-like brilliance appeared in the surrounding void. When a low rumbling sound was heard, Fairy Xingyu raised her hand again. It was as if she was holding a heavy object in her hand. Then, she slowly dropped it toward the Luna Beast's shadow. Squeak. The Luna Beast's shadow made a sound that Xiaohua was familiar with. Then, the shadow started to solidify. Suji did not dare to delay. He opened his mouth, and a mouthful of blood essence, mixed with silver light, fell into the Luna Beast's brilliance. Then, he pushed the blood essence along Xiaohua's moving finger. Boom! The Luna Beast immediately moved and rushed into the interlayer of space. In the chaotic interlayer of space, the Luna Beast's body could not help but spread out. However, there was a swaying tail behind it. The starlight in the tail was so bright that it dispersed the chaotic aura. Let's go. When Xiaohua saw the passageway appear, he hurriedly urged his body to rush in. However, Suji said in surprise, Don't be hasty. The palace door shadow has appeared before. Senior. Xiaohua smiled and said, The palace door shadow is just a facade. When Suji heard this, he could not help but laugh. Then, he held his forehead and said, I have fallen into a habitual mindset. Habitual mindset? Xiaohua did not understand what Suji meant. However, before he could ask further, Suji turned his head and said, Xingyu, follow behind me. Xiaohua, you. Stay at the back and protect me. Yes, senior. Xiaohua nodded. Suji stood up, and layers of strange markings appeared on his body. These markings rushed into the air and turned into tadpole-like runes, and when the runes flashed, A layer of dragon scale-like armor appeared around Suji's body. There were many lightning runes on this armor, and an indescribable aura was emitted from the armor. Looking at Fairy Xingyu, the marks also fell off her body and arms. A layer of soft armor that was engraved with many mysterious runes was also revealed. This soft armor was covered in starlight. Whoosh! Suji's body swayed, and a thunderbolt crashed into the star mark. He chased after the moon beast. Fairy Xingyu turned her head and looked at Xiaohua. She was a little surprised that Xiaohua did not take out any Dharma treasure or armor to protect himself. However, she did not have time to say more. She only nodded and signaled Xiaohua to be careful. Then, she turned into a ray of starlight and chased after him. The two immortals flew into the passageway and immediately emitted strange lights and shadows. The lights and shadows seemed to be extremely long and wide at the same time. An aura was emitted from the passageway like a tidal wave. Xiaohua took a deep breath and activated the vital energy in his body. Buzz, buzz. Countless sword hairs appeared on the surface of his body. When he turned into a sword, Xiaohua also flashed and rushed into the passageway. Quick! The actions of the three naturally attracted the attention of the Confucian cultivators from the four aristocratic families. Dongfang Yushan waved his hand without hesitation and said, "According to the agreement with Zhai Xinglu, let's go in?" Yes. The disciples of the Dongfang family responded happily. They formed a group and flew toward the Chitty River. The starry sky passageway, which was dozens of feet wide, became bigger and expanded in all directions. Before the disciples of the Dongfang family arrived, the Buddhist sect's guardians, who had been paying attention to Xiaohua and the others, had already arrived. They also activated their bodies without hesitation and entered the passageway. P.S. Fellow Taoists who like this book, please come to Qidian to vote, recommend, bookmark, and donate. Thank you for all your support. Chapter 4505. Damn it! Dongfang Yushan cursed under his breath. The four aristocratic families followed behind Zhai Xinglu, which was a form of order and a form of respect. Now that the Buddhist sect had broken it, the Dongfang family felt as if they had lost all face. However, Dongfang Yushan only cursed once before his gaze fell on the spatial mezzanine again. Within the spatial mezzanine, a streak of lightning, a streak of starlight, and a streak of sword light formed a knot-like trajectory within the spatial mezzanine. They were already nearing the shadow of one of the palace doors. Go! Dongfang Yushan was just about to raise his hand to give the order when suddenly, an unfamiliar face emerged from the crowd of Confucian cultivators in the distance. A black and white halo appeared around the unfamiliar cultivator as he instantly passed by Dongfang Yushan's side and charged straight into the passageway. Humph! Seeing the cultivator's figure pass by him, Dongfang Yushan snorted coldly and raised his hand slightly. Boom! A pillar of qi condensed into a chain and wrapped around the light figure. Little child. An old, cold-blooded voice suddenly sounded in Dongfang Yushan's ears. Don't be nosy. I don't want to make things difficult for the four aristocratic families today. As he spoke, a streak of black and white brilliance fell between the chains. That brilliance was like a key, and the entire chain collapsed in the blink of an eye. At the place where the brilliance landed, the fluctuations of a Tao sect spell arrogantly spread in all directions. Grand Mist Ancestor. Dongfang Yushan was shocked and screamed wildly in his heart. Why is he here at Xingyue Palace? While Dongfang Yushan was still in shock, the Grand Mist Ancestor had already charged into the passageway, transforming into a black and white brilliance as he charged towards the shadow of the palace doors. Quick, 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 don't delay. Although Dongfang Yushan was intimidated by the Grand Mist Ancestor, he knew that this old monster was definitely not someone he could deal with. Since the Grand Mist Ancestor did not want to create unnecessary trouble, he must have entered Xingyue Palace for something important. There was no need for him to find trouble with the Grand Mist Ancestor. He hurriedly urged his disciples. This time is different from the past. Although the Zhai Xinglu disciples did not take up too much time, we still might not have enough time. Following the entrance of the Dongfang family, more and more great demons of the demon clan noticed this place. They followed suit and gave up on their own efforts to pounce on this place. The Luna beast that was formed from the jade piece dashed into the void. As it went deeper into the void, its body became fainter and fainter. Suji was following behind the Luna beast. Seeing the shadow appearing again, he started to panic. At this moment, he was already in a hopeless situation, and he could only fight for survival while facing death. There was absolutely no room for retreat. As a result, a ball of blue lightning began to brew between Suji's eyebrows. Suji's worries were not unfounded. Although the ancient jade piece could break through the layers of space, when it was only a few feet away from the shadow of the palace door, the entire shadow of the Luna beast was reduced to a faint line. Chirp, chirp. The Luna beast let out a few low cries, and the line turned into nothingness. A jade piece that had lost its luster fell from the sky. Before Suji could catch it, the jade piece had already turned into powder and disappeared. Suji did not have time to think. He turned his hand and tapped the space between his eyebrows. Kacha! A huge thunderbolt condensed into a lightning pillar and struck forward. When the lightning pillar landed in the chaotic void, it immediately became bony and became as thick as a thumb. The horned dragon from before had now become an earthworm, and it struggled to drill into the shadow of the palace door. Although Suji was an immortal, his physical body was not that of an immortal. Similarly, he was not as strong as the great demon of the demon clan from before. Suji did not dare to take the risk himself and could only wait for the lightning pillar to pass through the void. Suji, move aside. Behind Suji, Fairy Xingyu's delicate voice chased after him. A beam of starlight shot out from Fairy Xingyu's eyes, went past Suji, and pounced on the void that was destroyed by the lightning pillar. Roar, roar, roar. The lightning pillar wrapped around the starlight and sped up. In just a few breaths, it had landed on the moving shadow of the palace door. Woo! Where the starlight landed, the shadow of the palace door stopped moving. The waves on it immediately passed through and rushed into the starlight corridor. Suji felt his vision blur, and layers of untainted land were once again introduced into his mind. Phew! Suji let out a long sigh. This strange situation was exactly what he had seen when he had rushed into the illusory shadow of the palace door. At this point, all the changes had been overcome. Things had returned to the original track that he and Fairy Xingyue had planned. Let's go. Suji raised his hand and waved. The star shuttle in his hand rushed into the shadow of the palace door like a meteor. His body was still like a thunderbolt, following the star shuttle closely. Suji had gone. Fairy Xingyu was delighted. She turned to look at Xiaohua, who was following behind her, and could not help but feel emotional. If Xiaohua had not found the correct shadow of the palace door and urged him, even if Suji had used the ancient jade slip, it would have been impossible for him to connect the shadow of the palace door to the starlight corridor in time. Be careful. There may be chaotic storms ahead. Fairy Xingyu reminded him and sped up, following behind Suji. Xiaohua nodded. With a flash of sword light, he also entered the shadow of the palace door. Behind Xiaohua, the waves of starlight that were as brilliant as fireworks rushed all the way to the edge of the spatial mezzanine. Boom! The moment the shockwave rushed out, a huge, protruding star mark appeared in the night sky above the Crimson River. This star mark was several miles in size and had many folds of light, just like a huge palace gate. Let's go. At this time, the disciples of the Dongfang family had already entered. The disciples of the Shimin family, the Nangong family, and the Baiming family were preparing. When they saw the expected door appear, they did not wait any longer. They each chose a direction and entered at the same time. The four great clans had just entered the passageway when the Star Moon Palace moved again. However, this time, there was a link at the palace door that was connected to the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. When the Star Moon Palace moved, the passageway that was condensed from starlight also moved. The passageway was also pulled by the almost chaotic interlayer of space. Although it moved, the aura in the chaotic space rushed into the starlight passage through the gaps in the starlight again. Whoosh! Like a real storm, the chaotic aura rushed out from all parts of the passage without any pattern. Suji and Fairy Xingyu were already experienced. When they saw that the starlight passage was somewhat entangled, they immediately became vigilant. As they released their divine senses, they immediately dodged when they sensed signs of a storm. As for Xiaohua, his flying technique was not inferior to Su Ji's and Fairy Xingyu's, so he was even more sensitive to approaching danger. In particular, when the chaotic aura passed through the starlight passage, Xiaohua instantly felt a sense of familiarity. Even if he did not use his divine senses, he could still dodge in time. Some distance behind Xiaohua were the Buddhist protectors who had rushed in first. They weren't as relaxed as Xiaohua and company. Seeing the chaos storm suddenly descend, the two sons of Buddha didn't have time to dodge. The chaos aura landed on their bodies. Boom, boom, boom. Their bodies suddenly expanded. Before they could react, their flesh and blood had already exploded, turning into dust and vanishing without a trace. The other Buddhist protectors who were lucky enough to dodge did not dare to be negligent. They did their best to activate their Buddhist clouds and rushed into the distance. After the Buddhist protectors, it was naturally the unfamiliar Taoist cultivator. At this time, the Taoist cultivator's forehead was filled with two colors, black and white. The black and white colors condensed into fine lines that connected the cultivator's two eyes. The left eye of the cultivator seemed to have no pupils and was only pure white. The right eye of the cultivator was completely filled with pupils and was only pure black. The cultivator's eyes were expressionless in the blink of an eye. However, when the cultivator flew past the chaotic storm, he looked at the light in the distance and said in the voice of the Grand Mist Ancestor, "This Taoist cultivator is indeed Xiaohua. When did he become so powerful? He's a human Mahayana realm cultivator. Back then, this old man's cultivation was only at this level. How could he have cultivated to such a level in just a few hundred years? If he had such a cultivation level, how could he be suppressed in the thousand demons' sacred realm? Right now, all the Confucian cultivators in the 100 schools of philosophers are talking about the profound yellow board, the fortune gate disciples, and the grand ascension stage human who streaked across the sky like a meteor. But who can tell me where he came from? The Grand Mist Ancestor was almost muttering to himself. Based on the clues we have now, he was the first to appear when I escaped. However, at that time, he was at the eye of the West Sea. Later, he appeared in the Yu province's Longevity Town. If I'm not mistaken, he must have arrived at the Longevity Town through the eye of the West Sea. Damn it, this bastard's luck is too good. There are so many spatial veins, and only a few people can come out alive. He just happened to be able to enter one of them. Sigh. If I had known that this Xiaohua was so mysterious, I would have brought him out back then. The Grand Mist Ancestor was already regretting his decision. If I had subdued him back then, wouldn't he be my powerful right-hand man now? But now, I've already offended him, and this enmity is not easy to mend. After that, I even let Taoist Master Ching Su and Master Heaven Flipping covet his forces in the Soaring Dragon Mountain Range. I don't even know if he's discovered it now. Of course, it was only for an instant, and the Grand Mist Ancestor said coldly, "Humph. So what if we fall out? Right now, the 3 continents are in turmoil, and heroes are emerging in large numbers. There are as many heroes as there are hairs on an ox in this chaotic world. But there is only one true emperor. With the Yin Yang Illustrated Handbook, it's only a matter of time before I recover to the peak of the Grand Ascension stage. Let me ask you, who in this world can be my opponent? Xiaohua is nothing more than a helper sent by the heavens to assist this old man in achieving hegemony. If he is tamed, then this old man doesn't mind giving him some benefits. If he is unruly, then this old man also doesn't mind personally eliminating him. The so-called fortune gate is merely a gift given to this old man by the heavens." Chapter 4506. Ha ha ha. The Grand Mist Ancestor couldn't help but laugh at the thought of this. Black and white clouds rose around him and wrapped around his body as he charged toward the end of the starlight. However, the black-white cloud merely flew a few zhang away. Swoosh! Another chaos storm came crashing down. The Grand Mist Ancestor was so pleased with himself that a corner of the black-white cloud was swept away by the chaos storm. The black-white cloud was like a bubble in the chaos storm, and it was blown away in an instant. The Grand Mist Ancestor's figure was revealed, but one of his legs was missing. Damn it! The Grand Mist Ancestor hurriedly retreated. His pair of black and white eyes stared ahead as he felt a little vexed. Why do I feel so impatient? It's better to be careful. Xiao Hua is a human Grand Ascension stage cultivator, so there's nothing to fear. However, the Star Moon Lord is a mysterious figure who can't be underestimated. Moreover, who is that cultivator beside the Star Moon Lord? It seems that even Xiao Hua has to treat him with respect. Could he be a Grand Ascension stage cultivator as well? That's impossible. How could there be so many Grand Ascension stage cultivators in my absence? See, could it be him? Thinking of this, the Grand Mist Ancestor hurriedly withdrew the black and white fog, revealing his body. His previous arrogance disappeared without a trace, and his black and white eyes revealed a strange expression as he stared at the distant starlight. He pondered, how could I forget about him? However, with his lifespan and strength, it's impossible for him to undergo tribulation. He should have died tens of thousands of years ago. Of course, I can't rule out the possibility that he had some fortuitous encounter that allowed him to preserve his primordial spirit and become undying like me. If it's him, I have to be careful. His abilities are strange, and he has countless tricks up his sleeves. I owe him a debt of gratitude for his guidance. Perhaps I should treat him with respect. What respect? If it's really him, then this old man should ask him why he didn't save this old man when he was clearly alive and saw this old man being suppressed in the eye of the West Sea. Why didn't he save me when he knew that I was being suppressed by the combined forces of the immortals, Buddhas, and demons? As a senior of the Tao Gate, he doesn't have the slightest awareness of a senior. He doesn't even care about the Tao Gate's disciples. What right does he have to be a senior of the Tao Gate? If this old man sees him, I'm going to question him in person. The more the Grand Mist Ancestor thought about it, the angrier he got. He had long forgotten about the him who had taught him, and the righteousness of reviving Taoism was on his lips. However, even if that was what the Grand Mist Ancestor thought, he didn't dare to question Suji. If Suji was really him, the Grand Mist Ancestor understood that Suji's divine ability could be withstood by those around him. The Grand Mist Ancestor wouldn't dare to appear in front of Suji. Therefore, even though the Grand Mist Ancestor had sensed the Dongfang family's disciples chasing after him, he did not dare to rush towards the Star Moon Palace. Even Suji and the others didn't dare to underestimate the power of the Chaos Storm. Even the Grand Mist Ancestor wasn't spared, not to mention the other cultivators. Most of the disciples of the four great clans who had rushed in first were caught off guard when they saw the chaotic windstorm falling. The lucky ones naturally saw the windstorm brushing past them and broke out in a cold sweat. The unlucky ones could only watch as the windstorm fell. Not to mention their physical bodies being destroyed and their bones turning into powder. Even the subbodies that had been brewing for a long time were destroyed by the windstorm. They first turned into vital energy, then merged with the chaotic aura and turned into nothingness. Naturally, there were some Confucian cultivators who weren't willing to die. Most of them had imperial weapons in their hands or on them. Their tone wasn't inferior to the Immortal Palace's imperial weapons. However, as the chaos storm brushed past, any imperial weapon lost its luster and any material turned into scrap metal. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, 20% of the disciples of the four great families had already fallen. Change formation and advance. Dongfang Yushan saw that the situation in the Starlight Passage was more dangerous than he had expected. He didn't dare to delay and hurriedly transmitted his orders. Unfortunately, within the Starlight Passage, his strength of a mere 7th-level origin power martial grandmaster wasn't enough. No one could hear him. Dongfang Yushan had no choice but to shout at the top of his lungs. Fortunately, the Dongfang family's foundation was rare in the hidden immortal continent. The disciples who were selected to enter the Star Moon Palace were mostly elites of the human race. They still had the ability to remain calm in the face of danger. When they heard Dongfang Yushan's orders, they immediately stabilized and hurriedly changed their formation. In a scattered star formation, they advanced inwards. If the Dongfang family could do this, The Shiman family, Nangong family, and Baiming family could do the same. The four great families occupied the entire Starlight Passage and rushed towards the Star-Moon Palace. Compared to the four great families, the Confucian cultivators of the 100 schools of philosophers were slightly inferior. However, the human race was strong in unity and order. Although nearly 30% of the disciples had fallen in the chaos storm, they still stubbornly advanced towards the Star-Moon Palace. Compared to the human race, the great demons of the demon race were far inferior. They also had some allies, but not many. When they saw the door of the Star-Moon Palace appear and the human race begin to enter in an orderly manner, they became anxious and swarmed towards the door. The more impatient ones had already bypassed the human cultivators and subconsciously flew in among them. The more meticulous ones waited for the human race to finish entering before finding some great demons to enter with them. Of course, this disorder had its advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that the chaos storm fell. Due to the disorder of the great demons, they were scattered all over the passage, and the chances of being hit by the chaos storm were not very high. However, it was also this disorder that slowed down the speed of entering the passage. Not long after, the Star-Moon Palace moved again and the chaos storm fell again. There were no surprises at all. Under the aura of chaos, the great demons of the demon race first emitted dazzling starlight and their bodies rapidly expanded. Then, without waiting for their bodies to come into contact with the Starlight Passage, boom, every bit of flesh and blood in the great demons' bodies exploded. This exploded flesh and blood separated from the starlight and immediately turned into nothingness. Go, go, go. The great demons of the demon race were all terrified. They scrambled to fly towards the Star-Moon Palace with all their might. It was inevitable that the passage would be somewhat chaotic. However, it was fortunate that this was not the first time that the Confucian cultivator clans had entered. They were already prepared and gave up part of the space to avoid the great demons. After a full hour, there were no longer any traces of humans or demons on the Crimson Earth River. Although the moon and stars were still bright and the night wind was blowing, the endless loneliness was still spreading in all directions, even more endlessly than the aura of primordial times. At this moment, the area of 100,000 miles around the Star-Moon Palace was filled with endless whirlpools of wind blades. Although the appearance of the Star-Moon Palace only triggered the aura of chaos within 1,000 miles, the changes in heaven and earth caused by the Star-Moon Palace were not limited to this. Although the wind blades formed small whirlpools, there was a huge whirlpool that surrounded the entire Star-Moon Palace. Xiaohua and the others were inside the whirlpool and could not sense it. However, the demon race inside the whirlpool could sense that even if they released their primordial thoughts could not come within 100,000 miles. Even immortal Emperor Go-Chen's supreme heavenly mirror and Mahavairakana revered world's divine ability could not see what was happening within 100,000 miles. Although Xiaohua did not know that so many things were happening in the passageway behind him, he could guess with his heels. Although he was flying at the front, he had encountered more than a dozen chaotic storms within the Starlight Passage and had even narrowly crashed into them several times. As such, he was well aware of the tragic fate of the Confucian cultivators behind him. Xiaohua saw the brilliance of the stars and the moon, which was even larger than a mountain, filling the entire passageway. In the brilliance of the stars and the moon, there was even a protruding light pillar that was about to split the heavens and the earth. Xiaohua understood that this was most likely the real door to the Star-Moon Palace. Suji and Fairy Xingyu had already flown down to the light pillar. Both of them were wearing armor and had solemn expressions. Suji urged his body to slowly fly above the light pillar, as if he was checking the situation of the palace door. Fairy Xingyu, on the other hand, had a puzzled look on her face as she watched Xiaohua fly over. "You actually know the swordsmanship of the Confucian cultivators?" Fairy Xingyu asked directly. "And you've even reached the sword transformation realm?" Xiaohua said faintly, "Didn't I tell you before? In the Dawn Rain continent, there is a group of sword cultivators who specialize in swordsmanship. I have obtained their secret technique, so I can transform into a sword." "Even if you can transform into a sword?" Fairy Xingyu shook her head again. The body of the human clan is absolutely no match for magic treasures and armor. I don't understand why you don't wear armor to protect yourself. Don't tell me that you don't have armor in your Qingquan bag. Fairy Xingyu is right. I really don't have a suitable armor, Xiao Hua said with a smile, as if he had no intention of hiding it. Humph, you're lying to me. Who would believe you? Fairy Xingyu could only snort coldly. She was really helpless against Xiao Hua, who was stubborn. Xiao Hua shrugged and smiled bitterly. I'm right. I don't know whether others believe it or not. Anyway, I don't believe anything you say, Fairy Xingyu said decisively. Xiao Hua did not expect Fairy Xingyu to believe him. He looked at the light pillar and asked, Why aren't you going in? Are you waiting for an opportunity? Yes. Fairy Xingyu nodded. The Star Moon Palace is an ancient divine object. With our cultivation, we can't go in easily. We have to wait until the Star Moon Palace moves. Xingyu? Suji's figure suddenly landed, and he said anxiously, The Star Moon Palace seems to be moving. Let's get out of the way first. Okay. Fairy Xingyu did not dare to be negligent. She hurriedly followed Suji and flashed to the side of the light pillar. Xiao Hua naturally followed behind. As soon as the three of them stood still, the brilliance of the stars and the moon that filled the world began to vibrate slightly. Then, the aura that was as vast as the sea let out a low roar. The protruding light pillar began to flow with mysterious fine lines from top to bottom. The fine lines were extremely strange and exuded an unapproachable majesty. When the fine lines fell to the bottom of the light pillar, the entire light pillar swelled toward the passage like a bubble. Puff! The light pillar turned into an aura and rushed out, revealing a starry sky under the brilliance. Chapter 4507. Let's go, Suji shouted, obviously reminding Xiao Hua that Fairy Xingyu's figure had already flashed into the starry sky. Entering the Star Moon Palace was not too troublesome. Xiao Hua only felt a strong primitive aura coming from all over the starry sky, making his mouth and nose feel very comfortable. Phew! Standing in the starry sky, Suji looked at the huge, convex, starry door behind him and the mottled light and shadow outside the starry door. He let out a long sigh and said, Entering the Star Moon Palace has never been as difficult as this time. Yes. Fairy Xingyu looked at the void under her feet and the picturesque stars and moons around her and said, Maybe it was too easy before and we didn't gain anything. Today's difficulty is the only way we can find the real passage. What was it like before? Xiao Hua asked tentatively. In fact, Xiao Hua had wanted to ask this question for a long time. However, seeing that Suji and Fairy Xingyu were unwilling to say more, Xiao Hua understood that although the two immortals trusted him, they were still somewhat guarded against him. After all, they had been taught a lesson before him. Now, they only knew about the primordial chaos ancestor. Who knew what the primordial chaos ancestor was like before? Therefore, Xiao Hua never asked too much about things that they did not want to say because he had a lot of things that he had not told them. It wasn't so complicated in the past. Suji replied faintly, Before we came in, there were many illusory doors. We only needed to find the right one. Activate the spirit shuttle, and let the spirit shuttle find the right passage. At that time, there were sometimes chaotic storms in the Starlight Passage, but not many. We were the first to come in and have encountered them more than 10 times. Based on our previous experience, 3 times is enough. Fairy Xingyu looked at the mottled starry door and gloated. This time, the 4 aristocratic families and the Confucian cultivators are unlucky. I'm afraid they will lose 50% of their disciples. In the past, only 10% of the great demons of the demon clan would die. This time, it will probably reach 30%. Suji nodded. After all, the chaotic storms have multiplied several times. Although their demon bodies are strong, under the chaotic aura, their demon bodies are like ants. Primordial chaos seems to be here. Fairy Xingyu thought for a while, and finally reminded Suji. Suji's face sank as he nodded. Yes, I've already sensed his aura. Although his strength is not as strong as when he was at his peak, he has already refined the yin-yang illustration mirror and entrusted his primordial spirit to it. His divine powers are even stronger than before. Fairy Xingyu said again. Not bad. Suji turned his head to look at the huge stargate and said, after refining the yin-yang illustration book, he has the preliminary ability to reverse yin and yang. Moreover, he also used the power of the yin-yang illustration book to forcibly occupy the body of a Taoist cultivator. If there is no special magic, it is very difficult to recognize him. Unfortunately, a dog can't change its habit of eating shit. Some people would never do something in their lifetime, but some people would do it with a wave of their hand. Some people would rather die than think about something, but some people would take it for granted. F***. Fairy Xingyue glared at Suji with dissatisfaction and said, Aren't you saying that I'm waiting for myself? That's right. Suji nodded solemnly. In this aspect, we can't compare to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua was extremely embarrassed. He waved his hand and said, Senior, you think too highly of me. In a life and death situation, I will also take over someone else's body. You won't. Suji seemed to be more certain than Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and touched his nose. Senior seems to understand me better than I do. Because a cultivator like you is the darling of the heavenly Tao. How could the heavenly Tao bear to test you with such a cruel choice? Suji answered calmly, without any hint of jealousy in his voice. Senior, you're flattering me. Xiao Hua disagreed. However, when he saw that Suji and Fairy Xingyue were not in a hurry to move forward, as if they were waiting for something, he asked again, By the way, why is the Hongming ancestor here? Does he also need to come to the Star Moon Palace to comprehend? I don't know either. Suji shook his head. Hongming is the most scheming. He came to the Star Moon Palace in his early years and disappeared from our sight. However, after he left the Star Moon Palace, he did not mention a word about what he saw in the Star Moon Palace. I have never interrogated him about this. He must have encountered something in the Star Moon Palace last time. This time, he wants to go and take a look. Hee, isn't that just right? Xiao Hua chuckled. Let's wait here and stop him first and interrogate him. Moreover, Xiao Hua originally wanted to say that he also had a grudge with the Hongming ancestor and wanted to ask about it. However, Suji shook his head and said, Everyone has their own ambitions. Why force him? Moreover, Hongming's ambition is too big. He will burn himself sooner or later. Why should we be nosy? Looking at Fairy Xingyue's pursed lips, Xiao Hua nodded inwardly. He gave Suji a thumbs up in his heart. Only such a magnanimous cultivator was worthy of being an immortal. Only such a broad-minded immortal was worthy of being a law enforcer. Xiao Hua admitted that it was difficult for him to pardon someone who had harmed him. Let's go. Suji originally wanted to wait a little longer. However, when he heard Xiao Hua mention killing the Hongming ancestor, he did not want to wait any longer. He called out and rushed into the starry sky. Let's go. Fairy Xingyue was obviously like Xiao Hua. She wanted to make a fool out of the Hongming ancestor. However, she was helpless now. She shrugged and said, Let's go through the meteor belt first. However, speaking of which, isn't it a little early to go through the meteor belt? Suji did not answer Fairy Xingyue. Fairy Xingyue chased after him resentfully. Xiao Hua also looked thoughtfully at the huge stargate and urged his body to follow the two immortals. The inside of the Star Moon Palace was incomparably huge, and there were no restrictions that restricted divine sense. Xiao Hua tried to release his divine sense, but he could not reach the end of the Star Moon Palace. Moreover, the space of the Star Moon Palace was very strange. It was different from the three continents, the ruins, and the primitive continent. Xiao Hua had already tried, but he could not sense the Shenhua continent. Needless to say, the Kunlun mirror could not be used either. More importantly, Xiao Hua vaguely felt that the power of laws that imprisoned him on the three continents had somewhat disappeared. The power of the two immortals flying in front of him had quietly changed. Perhaps they had already broken free from the shackles of the ninth-grade essence force. It's worthy of being an ancient divine object. Xiao Hua could not help but sigh. The Star Moon Palace seems to have formed a world of its own. Even the laws are different. No wonder the space in the Kunlun mirror cannot be used. Only a divine object like this has a passageway to the immortal world. After Xiao Hua and the others left, a stream of light flashed above the stargate. First, a bald head poked in and then looked around. Then, a fat figure squeezed in. This Buddhist sect guardian looked very ordinary, but one of his eyes was black and the other white. The Buddhist sect guardian jumped into the starry sky, and his fat body jumped a few times on the spot. He looked around blankly and then muttered to himself, "So, the Star Moon Palace is like this. Where's the Star Moon Master who came in earlier? Where are the two Tao sect cultivators?" After a while, there was no response from the silent starry sky. Only then did the Buddhist sect guardian smile. Looking at the place where Xiao Hua and the others had disappeared, the voice of the primordial chaos ancestor sounded from the guardian's mouth again. Hee, so they left long ago. Looks like that cultivator was not him. Even if it was him. So what? The Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook reverses Yin and Yang. Without the strength of an immortal, how could he discover the secret of the Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook? Even if he stood in front of me now, he would not be able to discover my background. Ha 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 ha. With that said, the Grand Mist Ancestor also flew in the direction Su Jifei had gone. However, beneath the Buddhist sect's protector's body, there were still Buddhist clouds beneath his feet. Even though there were faint traces of black and white clouds within the Buddhist clouds, Huang Xiaolong could still see them. One had to admit that the primordial chaos ancestor was a rare prodigy of the Tao. He fought against the immortals, Buddhas, and demons by himself. Of course, he was defeated in the end. However, even the Vairocana revered sovereign, immortal Emperor Go Chun, and the golden-winged Peng couldn't truly destroy him. They could only suppress him in the eye of the Western Sea. Moreover, he even managed to refine the yin-yang diagram that was suppressing him. Although he had just escaped and did not have much magic power, he was like a flood dragon entering the sea. Immortal Emperor Go Chun and the Vairocana revered sage were unable to find him. After the Grand Mist Ancestor left, no other Buddhist sect's enforcers came in. After the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, flashes of starlight flickered, and the four families' disciples rushed into the hall in a fluster. Of course, when everyone landed in the starry sky, they calmed down in a moment. There was no need for anyone to say anything. They stood in the starry sky and waited for the leaders of their respective clans to come in. Dongfang Yushan, Shimen Hengyue, Nangong Pingping, and Baiming Qi Han were the last to come in. They did not look at the surrounding starry sky, but at their respective disciples. Although they had expected it, when they saw the number of people in the group, their faces were still a little pale. Dongfang Yushan looked at Shimen Hengyue and the other two inside. "Brothers, our task this time is considered a failure. Our Dongfang family has lost almost half of our disciples. I presume that the rest of you are about the same, right?" "Yes," Nangong Pingping said. "I have already heard from my brother's introduction." According to them, entering the Star Moon Palace was not a big deal. Even if our luck was bad, it was impossible to lose 10% of our disciples. Now, it is actually half. I don't know how to explain it when I return to the clan. Shimen Hengyue glanced at Dongfang Yushan and said, "Brother Dongfang must have some plans. I won't hide it from you, brothers. I also wanted to come here when I came in. Our four great clans have been friends for generations, and we're not the same as the 100 schools of Confucianism. Our clans have always benefited both sides if we cooperate. Today's situation does not allow us to hesitate. I suggest that the disciples of our four great clans cooperate and recommend Brother Dongfang to be our leader. What do you think? P.S. Fellow Taoists who like this book, please come to the starting point to vote. Vote for recommendation, bookmark, and reward. Thank you for all forms of support. Chapter 4508. This, Dongfang Yushan frowned slightly and declined. "I want the four families to merge into one, but it's better for the four of us to discuss the decision together." "Sigh, Brother Dongfang, why decline?" Baiming Qi Han sighed. "Exploring the Star Moon Palace isn't a particularly important matter. Brother Dongfang doesn't need to take any responsibility. We just need to do our job well and not let the sect punish us." "That's good too." Dongfang Yushan nodded and looked around. "Our four families still don't have enough disciples. Why don't we wait for those families that are on good terms with us and enter together?" Nangong Pingping and the others looked at each other. then looked at the disciples of their respective families and nodded. Because the opportunities in the Star Moon Palace were different from ordinary opportunities, it didn't care about the number of people. No matter how many people there were, those who had opportunities would naturally be able to comprehend the power of literature and break through the bottleneck to become a literature saint. No matter how few people there were, if they didn't have opportunities, they would gain nothing. Seeing that no one had any objections, Dongfang Yushan discussed with the others in a low voice and quietly allowed the other disciples to enter. During this time, there were more great beasts from the demon race who came in one after another. When these great beasts entered, they were all ecstatic. Then, they looked at the humans who were waiting inexplicably and moved their bodies to different places in the starry sky. Seeing that these great beasts flew in different directions, Dongfang Yushan and the others looked at each other and smiled with disdain. Because, like the Grand Mist ancestor, they were very clear that there were countless passages from the Star Moon Palace to the depths of the starry sky. However, until now, they only knew that the path to the meteor belt was the safest and had the least number of monsters. After the great beasts, the disciples of various families came in. Seeing the disciples of the 4 families waiting here, how could they not know why? Those who were related to the 4 families naturally came over, and those who weren't were also thinking of ways to get close or began to form an alliance according to the previous plan. Gongshu family, Murong family, Duamu family, Huangfu family, Confucius family, and other families also began to gather around, ready to go. While the 4 aristocratic families were gathering their forces, Xiao Hua had already followed Suji and Fairy Xingyue to the so-called meteor belt. According to Xiao Hua's thoughts, the so-called meteor belt should be similar to the falling rock formation he had seen before. There would be many meteors shuttling back and forth in this area. If one wanted to pass through, they only needed to avoid the meteors and be careful. However, when he flew through the starry sky and arrived in front of a huge space, he realized that he had been too naive. The Star Moon Palace was a place that even the 2 banished immortals feared, so how could it possibly have a simple rockfall matrix? In front of Xiao Hua was an extremely large space. This space was almost boundless and stretched across the starry sky in front of the 3 of them. There were a lot of spatial fragments in the space, and these fragments were constantly flying around recklessly. Xiao Hua looked at it. These fragments were either in the shape of a long strip, or in the shape of a square, or in the shape of an irregular hexagram. However, when Xiao Hua looked deeper into the space, there were even more fragments that didn't have any fixed shape. One moment, they would condense into a circle, and the next moment, they would condense into a sheet. The strangest thing was that there were lines that didn't have any shape flowing freely in the space. However, no matter the size or shape of the fragments, there was a layer of starlight flickering around these fragments. The starlight blocked Xiao Hua's vision, so he couldn't see what was under the starlight. Xiao Hua released his divine thought naturally, but as soon as his divine thought entered the space, it was immediately torn apart by several unknown forces. It was instantly torn apart, and an indescribable stabbing pain came from his Naiwen Palace. The innate divine restriction outside his Naiwen Palace actually couldn't stop this space from attacking his divine thought. When they were slightly closer, boom, 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 layers upon layers of ghostly wails and wolf howls came from the space. This sound of the wind was quite soul-stealing, causing Xiao Hua to feel a chill run down his spine. The strangest thing was that within the space, there was also the aura of a violent wind blowing against his face. Strands of ripples also rushed over along with the aura. Xiao Hua could easily distinguish that a portion of the aura and ripples were similar to the Thousand Demons' sacred realm, while a portion was similar to the ruins and the primeval continent. Of course, there was still a portion that Xiao Hua did not know about. This, Xiao Hua was dumbfounded. He whispered to Fairy Xingyu, "Is this the meteor belt that Senior mentioned?" "Of course," Fairy Xingyu said proudly. "Can't you see that there is starlight on these fragments? Moreover, these fragments are flowing in this space like water. Shouldn't they be called a meteor belt?" "All right," Xiao Hua said helplessly. "I thought the so-called meteor belt was similar to the star array." "What?" Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. "Do you think this name is inappropriate?" "It's not that it's inappropriate," Xiao Hua said with a bitter smile. "I just think It's a little weird to call it a meteor belt. Then there's no other way. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. I was the one who named the Star Moon Palace. Now, it's famous in the 3 continents. If you want to change it, I'm afraid it won't be easy. Senior, is there any danger in this meteor belt? Xiao Hua ignored Fairy Xingyu's show and looked at Suji. Suji looked at the chaotic space and pointed at the space fragments with his hand. He said, these space fragments are different. Some are earth fragments, some are ocean fragments, and some are pure void fragments. If they are void fragments, there will be voids in different realms. After the human clan enters, most of our bodies will be destroyed by the chi of heaven and earth. Even if they are earth fragments, ocean fragments, or mountain fragments, there will be some strange beasts on them. Some of these strange beasts are from the immortal world, some are from the Demon League, and there are many that we don't know. If the human clan cultivators encounter them, they will most likely die. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and looked at the fragments that had no rules. His heart was pounding. Suji then pointed at the space between the fragments and said, then there are these spaces. Divine sense can't enter these spaces. Even if our divine sense were to enter, it would be torn apart, let alone your divine sense. The reason why there is such a strange phenomenon is because these space fragments belong to different realms. The auras of different realms collide with each other in the space, forming an extremely strange cutting force. You must have sensed the aura within. Some are similar to the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm, some are similar to the Immortal Realm and the Demon League. Most of them are ancient, desolate auras. Those are the fragments left behind when the Star Moon Palace was refined in ancient times. There are shattered, desolate spaces on them. The chaotic intertwining of the auras of different realms will not only tear apart divine senses and extended thoughts, but also the bodies of the human clan. Therefore, we can't fly through this space for no reason. We can only find a gap in the chaotic aura and land in a safe space fragment. Then, we can cross this meteor belt step by step. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. Of course, what if we are lucky enough to encounter a transmission channel in one of the spaces without having to pass through all the space fragments? I'm not that lucky, Xiao Hua immediately said with a bitter face. Whenever I have to find a way out, I've always taken the furthest path. It's a thankless task. Hee. Fairy Xingyu covered her mouth and giggled. I thought you said you would be the luckiest. Xiao Hua shrugged and asked Suji in bewilderment, Senior, if I didn't have the Kunlun mirror, would the disciples of the star-picking tower and the cultivators chosen to sense the power of the stars and moon also have to pass through this meteor belt? Suji naturally understood Xiao Hua's doubts and explained. When Fairy Xingyu and I first discovered the Star Moon Palace, we were the ones who entered. In addition to this meteor belt, we also went to many other places. Therefore, we have a good understanding of the Star Moon Palace and the way to enter it. Therefore, most of the disciples chosen by Fairy Xingyu in the Star-Picking Tower should be able to pass through the previous Starlight Passage smoothly. Entering the Star Moon Palace is a kind of reward for them. As for what opportunities they will encounter, that is their own business. Therefore, generally speaking, after entering the Star Moon Palace, Fairy Xingyu will let them go their own way and find their own path. The cultivators chosen to help us search for the power of the stars and moon will naturally have to follow us. When passing through this meteor belt, half of them will have no problem. The other half will not be able to pass through. Fairy Xingyu and I will use our magical powers to bring them over. That's impossible. Xiao Hua looked at the space fragments floating in the sky like a mighty river and said in surprise, I don't even dare to say that I have full confidence in passing through this meteor belt. Senior, half of the cultivators you mentioned will be able to pass through? This time, we came at the wrong time. We might have come a little early or a little late. It's different from the previous times. Let's wait a little longer. It won't be long before the space vortex of this meteor belt stops. At that time, we will have a chance to pass through. Suji said faintly. He sat cross-legged in front of the starry sky. The lightning mark between his eyebrows flickered and appeared. A very mysterious fluctuation emerged from Suji's body and spread toward the vicinity of the meteor belt. When Fairy Xingyu saw this, she frowned and whispered, Suji, can your physical body withstand the expansion of thoughts? It doesn't matter, Suji said softly. I won't be using this physical body soon. There's no harm in trying. It's better to be careful, Fairy Xingyu said with concern. It's not the final moment yet. If something unexpected happens. Yes, I know. Suji nodded. I know what I'm doing. That. Xiaohua thought for a moment and whispered, Senior, if you don't have to worry, leave this task to me. Don't use the methods of the immortal world. Chapter 4509. You. Suji was a little skeptical and asked, what other magical powers do you have? This is the Star Moon Palace. Let me try first. Xiaohua said with a smile. If I can do it, you don't have to waste. Extend thought. The corners of Suji's mouth curled into a faint smile as he said in a gratified manner, all right, you can try first. As he spoke, Suji withdrew his extend thought and looked at Xiaohua kindly. Even Fairy Xingyu had a grateful smile in her eyes. Xiaohua nodded slightly at the two immortals. He raised his hand and patted his forehead, opening his delusion breaker eye again. Seeing a green shadow flashing between Xiaohua's eyebrows, Suji and Fairy Xingyu looked at each other with a strange look in their eyes. Xiaohua opened his eyes, and everything in front of him changed again. What starry sky, what meteor belt, they all disappeared. In front of him was an incomparably huge space, and the space was filled with countless fragments of different splendors. These fragments seemed like dust, and also like crushed stones, floating in the countless fine lines that seemed like flowing water. The fragments were similar to the space fragments that Xiaohua had seen with his naked eye, but they were much smaller. As for whether each fragment was a continent or an ocean, Xiaohua's delusion breaker eye could not tell. As for the fine lines, they flowed at an extremely fast speed and were entangled with each other. Some fine lines even rushed into the fragments and shattered them. Not only were the brilliance of these fine lines different, but their thickness was also different. Some were as thin as hair, and some were as thick as threads. However, hundreds of millions of fine lines enveloped the entire space. In front of Xiaohua's eyes, there was a thin mist-like golden light that protected Xiaohua and the others. There were some strange runes in the golden light. These runes were like fine lines of light, and within the fine lines of light, smaller runes were engraved. This golden light covered the sky and the earth, separating it from the fine lines like flowing water in an orderly manner. Even in the distance of the meteor belt, it looked like the runes were also paved with golden light. Xiaohua looked around. The fine lines of the flowing water seemed to have no source and no end. On his left and right, two dim silvery white human-shaped lights flashed slightly. Xiaohua naturally knew that this silver-white humanoid brilliance was Suji and Fairy Xingyu. Therefore, he only glanced at them from the corner of his eye. He did not dare to look at them for too long. Then, he focused his delirium dharma eye on the fine lines of the water flow. After looking at it carefully for a moment, Xiaohua had an idea in his heart. Just as Suji said, the fine lines were slowly slowing down. Moreover, the collisions between the different colored fine lines were starting to lessen. Xiaohua could even see a slightly chaotic order in the fine lines before his eyes. Seeing the delusion breaker dharma eye on Xiaohua's forehead disappear, Suji asked with some concern, "How is it? Your divine art didn't suffer any backlash from the meteor belt, right?" Xiaohua's heart warmed slightly. This kind of adventure was a true adventure. There was no need to worry about being tricked by others. If there was some danger, others would even block it for you. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Senior, you should know that this divine ability of mine usually won't backfire." "Well, what did you see?" Unlike Suji, Fairy Xingyu urged, "Can you see the passage they flew through?" Xiaohua shook his head and said, "There is no passage in this meteor belt. We can only rush through it slowly like what you said just now." "Oh," Fairy Xingyu responded with some disappointment. "However, I saw that these different auras are slowing down. Moreover, there is a certain order between the auras." Xiaohua said again. A strange look flashed across Suji's eyes as he whispered, "Your divine art? Is it the Buddha's heavenly eye?" "Well, it's somewhat similar." Xiaohua didn't hide it and replied, "However, there is also a big difference. My Dharma eye is much more powerful than heavenly eye." "You're just bluffing." Fairy Xing, you didn't believe him. Also, Xiaohua pointed to the two sides and asked, is there no other place that is easy to pass through? Actually, there are other pavilions in this meteor belt that we can go to. Suji explained. However, those pavilions require some strange tokens. Fairy Xingyu and I didn't find any, so we can't enter those pavilions. On the other side of this meteor belt, there are some places that don't require tokens. In particular, there is one place, that might be the passage, so we have to go through there. When Suji and I first came here, we spent most of our time in this meteor belt, so we know the situation on the other side of this meteor belt the best. Fairy Xinghua added, this meteor belt is almost endless. Even with our ability, we can't find the end of it. In the nearby hundreds of thousands of miles, only this place has a relatively weak aura. There are also times when it has a lull. The other places are like rivers, and the auras of the various realms are like waves, never calming down. We can't pass through it all. Senior, you must have tried other methods. Xiaohua probed. Were they all ineffective? Yes. Suji nodded. After finding a pavilion with a strong immortal spiritual aura, we were a little impatient when we entered. When we passed through this meteor belt, we tried to use the flowing cloud bridge of the immortal realm. Not only did it not bring us to the other side of the meteor belt, but it also almost destroyed my physical body at that time. Senior, can you protect me? Xiaohua pondered for a moment and asked, what do you want to do? Suji frowned. Since we're here, don't fail at the last step. Why don't you wait for a while? Junior will try. Xiaohua smiled. If it works, not only will Senior have more confidence, but Junior will also have more means to protect my life in this Star Moon Palace. It's better not to try. Suji's concern was like facing his own junior. He said, Fairy Xingyu and I didn't tell you the details of the Star Moon Palace because we were afraid that you would have your own ideas and inevitably use your own methods. You just need to follow behind us and contribute when it's time. Junior will try. Xiaohua still refused to give up. If there's anything unusual about this meteor belt, Senior only needs to block the backlash of the meteor belt. Presumably, Senior already has some experience, right? Suji was a little unhappy. He glanced at Xiaohua and said, have you really decided? Yes. Junior wants to try. Xiaohua nodded affirmatively. Well, you can cast the spell. Suji agreed. If there's anything unusual, I'll block the backlash for you. However, the backlash of this meteor belt is very strange. I'm not sure if I can block it. You have to be careful too. Okay, Xiaohua responded. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the soul silk between his eyebrows rushed out. In an instant, a ghostly chanting sound came from the soul silk. One by one, green seal characters flew out from between his eyebrows and quickly separated and combined in midair. Shaman. Fairy Xingyue opened her mouth, her eyes filled with horror. Suji's expression also changed drastically. Before Suji could stop Xiaohua, he saw the green seal text land in the sky of the meteor belt. A tumbling teleportation channel slowly appeared, and within the teleportation channel, the green seal text swarmed towards the opposite side of the meteor belt. However, just as this technique passed through the golden light that Xiaohua's delusion breaker eye could see, the runes in the golden light immediately transformed into a long spear that was several feet long. It let out a sharp whistle and crazily rushed into the green seal text. Pa! With a loud sound, the green seal text of the word transmit completely collapsed. The transmission channel that had just been formed also collapsed from the inside out. When the transmission channel turned into hundreds of small green seal characters, more golden runes once again turned into thumb-sized spears and pierced into the smaller green seal characters. Pa pa pa. More rumbling sounds were heard until all the green seal characters were destroyed. Not only that, when the green seal characters disappeared, the golden light condensed into a spear several feet long and pierced toward Xiaohua's eyebrows like lightning and thunder. Get out of the way. Although Suji couldn't see the spear condensed from the golden light, he could feel the recoil of the meteor belt. Seeing that the attack was even more powerful than the one he had encountered before, Suji shouted loudly, and his figure was about to block in front of Xiaohua. No need. Xiaohua felt a strong wind coming from between his eyebrows. Even his delusion breaker, I seem to be blown apart by this strong wind. Xiaohua hurriedly shouted, "We'll just use the thunder technique to block this attack." As he spoke, lightning surged around Xiaohua's body. Four-colored lightning shot out from his hand and pounced on the spear-shaped runes. Okay. Suji didn't dare to be careless. His hands formed seals, and two water-blue lightning passed through the space and merged with Xiaohua's four-colored lightning. Bang! With a loud bang, the five-colored lightning was smashed into powder. The spear condensed by the golden runes didn't collapse, but its sharpness was already reduced by 60%. Xiaohua's figure flashed, and in an instant, the spear didn't even touch his shadow. Bang! Not far behind Xiaohua, the starry sky was destroyed by the invisible spear, and a huge black hole appeared. A strong suction force came from the black hole, sucking in the nearby fluctuations and aura. Xiaohua and the others were slightly shocked. They each used their magical powers to teleport away, avoiding the suction force of the black hole. After a few minutes, the black hole slowly disappeared, and Xiaohua flew back. "How was it?" Suji asked. "Have you given up?" "Yes, I know." Xiaohua nodded. He had really given up. It seemed that the soul cultivation technique, which had always been successful, had lost its former power in the Star Moon Palace built in ancient times. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, "Suji, Xiaohua is doing this out of kindness. He just wants to save us some trouble. He's just trying to be brave and competitive." Xiaohua smiled faintly and didn't admit it. Suji glanced at Xiaohua with a cold expression. He then looked at Fairy Xingyu and said, "I haven't been a judge for many years. I'm no longer as cold-blooded as before. Furthermore, I was once an ordinary mortal. Naturally, I can see these things as well." Chapter 45:10. After that, Suji looked at Xiaohua again and said earnestly, "Xiaohua, have you forgotten? Xingyue and I have already warned you. Some magical powers should not be revealed in front of others. Did you take it as a passing wind? Although we don't understand the magical power you just used, how can we not know what it is? Taboo power is the most taboo power in the immortal world. As long as there is a taboo power, the celestial venerables will hunt it down and eliminate it. I know you trust us, but we don't dare to trust ourselves. Who knows what kind of interrogation we will encounter when we return to the immortal world? Even if it's a soul search, it's normal. We can't guarantee that we won't reveal your secret. If this matter brings disaster to you, then you can only blame yourself." Suji's words were very strict, but they were sincere and sincere. Xiaohua seemed to see another helpless person standing in front of him and berating him. He straightened his face, bowed, and said, "Yes, I understand. Thank you for your reminder, Senior. In this world, there is no one you can absolutely trust." The coldness on Suji's face lessened slightly, and he said, "It's just that the price of betrayal is different. If the price is high enough, some people may even abandon the realm that gave birth to them." "Yes, I've learned my lesson." Xiaohua, of course, knew the care in Suji's words. He didn't dare to straighten his back and answered respectfully, "It's good that you know. You're just two." Suji hesitated and stopped. He looked at the chaotic realm, and the aura gradually calmed down. He said, "Forget it. Let's not talk about this. The meteor belt seems to have changed. Let's wait a little longer." "Okay," Xiaohua agreed. In fact, he opened his illusion breaker eyes again and carefully observed the meteor belt. Fairy Xingyue watched Suji berate Xiaohua from the side. Her eyes showed a trace of confusion and a trace of complexity. At this time, the Xingyue Palace had begun to bustle. Other than the four aristocratic families and some of the Confucian cultivators rushing to the meteor belt, the other Confucian cultivators and great demons of the demon clan also went to other places in the Xingyue Palace. There were no traces of people outside the Xingyue Palace. When the Xingyue Palace moved again, even the starlight passage between the gate and the Thousand Demons' sacred realm could not hold on. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The entire starlight passage completely collapsed, and the passage was completely filled with chaotic storms. In just a moment, the starlight disappeared, and a powerful whirlwind in the interspace. The whirlwind blew out of the interlayer, scattering the power of the stars and the moon in the sky. Without the starlight passage, the Xingyue Palace began to move faster. In the time it took to eat a meal, the huge aura within hundreds of thousands of miles was concealed in the void again. Boom! The moment the aura disappeared, the Chitty River, which had been split open by the Xingyue Palace, let out a violent roar, and the river surged again. Furthermore, at the spot where the Xingyue Palace had disappeared, the space within hundreds of thousands of miles seemed to have suddenly become completely empty. Endless qi of heaven and earth and noble qi surged in, forming a rare hurricane. Not only did the hurricane cause the wind and clouds to sway in the sky, but it also caused the Chitty River to surge with red waves. The waves surged violently, and the nearby mountain ranges were blown into flying sand and rolling stones, causing the forest to collapse. The previously bright starry sky was gone, and the hook-like crescent moon was even more desolate. Occasionally, it would appear in the gaps of the dark clouds. The moonlight was also scattered by the strong wind. The Xingyue Palace appeared and disappeared again. It was unknown where it would appear again and when it would appear again. Senior, Xiao Hua observed for a moment in front of the meteor belt and whispered, "It's about time. I feel that the aura in this area has begun to calm down. If I'm not wrong, I found some patterns." Suji nodded. "It's similar to my perception, but I'm not sure. Tell me, which spatial fragment should we fly to?" Xiao Hua explained, "Senior, I don't know which spatial fragment to fly to, but I know which spatial fragment has a stable aura." "I understand." Fairy Xingyue nodded. "According to our previous experience, there are currently 6 spatial fragments that we can enter. If there are other disciples, we will split into 6 groups and enter separately. Now that you can determine the stability of the spatial fragments, we don't have to test them one by one." "Which 6 spatial fragments?" Xiao Hua asked hurriedly. Fairy Xingyue raised her hand and pointed. She did not point at the few spatial fragments closest to Xiao Hua and the others. Instead, she pointed at 2 rectangular spatial fragments, 3 rectangular spatial fragments, and 1 6-star spatial fragment that was slightly further away. The 6-star spatial fragment was even further behind a pile of spatial fragments. Xiao Hua was stunned. He looked up at Fairy Xingyue and said, "It seems, Senior, you're not just relying on your experience." "Oh, is that so?" Fairy Xingyue shrugged and said, "I'm afraid you're mistaken. I didn't use any magical power. This is just my experience." Xiao Hua nodded. "Senior, you're right. I understand." Then, Xiao Hua pointed at the 6-star spatial fragment in the distance and said, "There's only 1 6-star spatial fragment within a dozen miles of the left. The 6-star spatial fragment is very magical. Any spatial fragment that collides with it will turn into 6 wisps of aura. These 6 wisps of aura are easy to balance with each other. Other shapes don't have this characteristic. I think this 6-star spatial fragment is safer." Xiao Hua only said that he was guessing and did not say what he had seen. Suji's cold face relaxed slightly. He nodded and said, "According to our previous experience, the normal shapes, such as rectangular and square, are similar to the fragments of the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. The strange line-like fragments are the fragments of the ancient desolation. The hexagonal, heptagonal, or other more complicated shapes should be similar to the fragments of the immortal world, the Demon League, and even the Dragon Realm. And according to our experience, the fragments with complicated shapes are usually at the back. We won't choose such a fragment for the first time," Fairy Xingyue added. Hearing Fairy Xingyue mention experience, Suji looked up at her and smiled bitterly. It was just a little late. Their previous experience was already unreliable. What was the use of mentioning experience now? "Haha, maybe there's a transmission channel in this fragment?" Xiao Hua said optimistically. "Senior, how should we go in? Are we just going to fly in like that?" "Of course not. That's courting death." Fairy Xingyue shook her head and took out a magic weapon that looked like an astrolabe from her soft armor. She looked around and took a few steps sideways. Then, she looked around again and took 2 more steps forward. Xiao Hua noticed that there was a flame flashing in Fairy Xingyue's right eye. Although the flame had a strong aura of starlight, Xiao Hua could see clearly that there were also very few green threads of light in it. Forbidden power. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes. He knew that Suji was not exaggerating. In order to destroy the Tao, the immortals, Buddhas, and demons could join forces to wipe out the Tao sect cultivators from the 3 continents. Immortal Emperor Gaochen could also raise the Tao sect cultivators like dogs in the Ponglai immortal realm. Since the immortals of the immortal world regarded soul cultivation as a taboo, they would definitely have more powerful and violent means to deal with matters related to soul cultivation. Then, why did the immortal world regard soul cultivation as a taboo power? Judging from the few traces of green seal script in Fairy Xingyue's cultivation method, which was similar to the immortal world's cultivation method, Xiao Hua knew that soul cultivation could connect heaven and earth and make ghosts and gods weep. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua could not help but send a voice transmission. Senior, I still have a question that I want to ask you. Hearing Xiao Hua's voice transmission, Suji frowned and said, since you shouldn't ask, then don't ask. Even if you ask, I won't answer. Alas, I know I shouldn't ask. But the problem is, apart from you, I really can't find anyone in the 3 continents to ask. Xiao Hua said helplessly, and you're the only person in the world that I can trust. I've already told you that no one in the world can be trusted, including me. Suji replied mercilessly. However, Suji thought for a moment and said, if you think you have to ask, you can ask, but I can decide not to answer. Okay. Xiao Hua nodded hurriedly. Looking at Fairy Xingyue, who was wandering in the starry sky, he asked, I've seen the devil world's devil emperor sacrifice millions of blood spirits. He wanted to borrow the souls of those blood spirits. I don't understand. What's the use of these souls? Of course, in our Taoist Dharma spells, refining our natal Dharma treasures and cultivating the nascent soul out of the body also require the power of souls. I know this, but I don't understand. With so many souls, what kind of divine ability can you cultivate? You should ask the devil race this question. Suji did not want to answer Xiao Hua's question. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. He himself had a demon lord's little brother, and this little brother was a pure demon clan's devil spirit. He also had the devil blade murder, but Xiao Hua was clear in his heart that the demon clan devoured souls and raised them based on their instincts. They really didn't know the true use of souls, or perhaps only a higher realm than the demon realm would know. Seeing Xiao Hua's bitter smile, Suji seemed to be unable to bear it. He thought for a moment and said, the human race often says that human nature is the most complicated thing in the world. Then this soul is the most mysterious thing in the world. Even immortals don't dare to touch the power of souls. Let's put it this way. The foundation of the Buddhist sect's 9 transformations golden body is reincarnation, and the foundation of reincarnation is the soul. The foundation of the Buddhist sect's golden body and Buddha fruit is faith. Faith is a manifestation of the power of souls. Just this manifestation has created the Buddhist sect, a Buddhist sect that can compete with the Taoist sect. How big of an impact do you think the power of souls will have? Oh, Xiao Hua, what do you think is the most primitive power of souls? P.S. Fellow Taoists who like this book, please come to the starting point to vote. Vote for recommendation, collect, and reward. Thank you for all your support. Chapter 45:11. Of course, Xiao Hua knew that the answer Suji was talking about was probably the soul. However, he thought about it and answered in the opposite way. From what I know, it should be pure physical strength. Yes, you're right. Suji nodded. Whether it's the human race, the demon race, the spirit race, the devil race, or the divine race and the holy light race that you don't know about, they all admit that the most primitive power in this world is the physical strength. Of course, the physical bodies of the other races may be different from the physical bodies of the human race. However, as far as I know, an immortal king who once came into contact with the forbidden power said that the most primitive power in this world is probably the soul power. Because the soul was formed long before the physical body can decay and decay, but the soul exists forever. Junior understands. Xiao Hua nodded. You don't understand. Suji interrupted Xiao Hua unceremoniously and continued to explain. I don't know if you know about the underworld. The underworld has the power of the dead, which is also a part of the soul power. The power of the dead is the nemesis of all magic power, immortal power, and Buddhist power. The underworld is not a simple world. It is the place where all life is annihilated and where all life sprouts. Even someone as strong as the heavenly lord of punishment of the punishment palace doesn't dare to provoke the underworld because the underworld has a part of the soul power. Xiaohua, Taoists can become immortals by cultivating spells. Confucian cultivators can ascend to heaven by cultivating Confucian techniques. Buddhists can cultivate the 9 transformations golden body. Demons can break through the starry sky by tempering their demonic bodies. Then, those who can control the soul power can cultivate gods. Gods? Xiaohua pretended to be surprised. Gods, what are they? Can they also be cultivated? Suji didn't answer. He saw that Fairy Xingyu had stopped and turned to look at him. He nodded at Fairy Xingyu and stared at Xiaohua. Xiaohua, this is my last sentence. In the future, don't ask any other immortal such questions. Gods may be the end of the immortal's cultivation, or the end of the demon league, the immortal world, and the heavenly court. However, no immortal knows whether or not he will be a god at the end of his cultivation, because there is a saying in the immortal world, gods can never be cultivated. Only the ancient times had gods. In the current era, there are no more miracles and no more gods. So, Xiaohua, there's no need to talk about taboo energy in the future. After saying that, Suji moved and landed beside Fairy Xingyue. He asked, Xingyue, are you ready? Yes, I can activate it now. Fairy Xingyue nodded and said, however, I need a breath of immortal qi. I just changed my body, so I can't activate the immortal mark. Then let me do it. Suji raised his hand to take the astrolabe, but Fairy Xingyu said worriedly, you just used a similar immortal technique. Can your body withstand it? Didn't I just say it? I don't need this body anymore. It won't be a problem. Suji indifferently said and took the star plate. Then he shouted to Xiaohua, who was in a daze. Xiaohua, quickly come over. We are about to enter. After saying that, Suji raised his eyebrows again. He looked at the distant starry sky and saw a fat figure. He snorted coldly and said, You're fast. It's only been a moment. I'm afraid you've already killed a few more people. Of course he doesn't care about other people's lives. Fairy Xingyue also said coldly, he only cares about his own life. Xiaohua was a little shocked by Suji's words. At this time, he had just come to his senses. He turned his head and looked at the body of the Buddha occupied by the Grand Mist Ancestor. He suddenly understood and sighed. I'd rather betray the world than let the world betray me. Let's go. I don't want to see this filthy thing. Suji raised his hand and threw the astrolabe into the air. He spat a mouthful of immortal qi on the astrolabe. The astrolabe did not change, but Suji's face began to look old. His sideburns were stained with white frost, and his face was full of wrinkles. Seeing this, Xiaohua was suddenly shocked and felt a chill run down his back. The warning of the Hutu Stockade's Elder Wu rang in his ears again. Suji's words just now also rang in his ears. He thought with a trembling heart, I don't know if my body is worth the trust in Suji's heart. Suji's celestial spiritual qi landed on the astrolabe, and a silvery white brilliance appeared on the astrolabe. Layers of mysterious markings rushed out from the brilliance, and these markings were formed by densely packed runes. As the markings flew out, Suji rubbed his hands together, and thick crystal lights fell into the astrolabe. The markings then turned into hundreds of flying birds, and these birds had starlight engraved on their foreheads. Their eyes were like crescent moons, and when their wings flapped, the sound of wind and thunder could be heard. Go! Suji waved his sleeve. The hundreds of birds flew into the meteor belt with a quack quack sound. Let's go. We'll use the simplest flying technique. Suji returned the astrolabe to Fairy Xingyu and put his hands behind his back. A faint cloud appeared under his feet, and he rushed into the meteor belt with the birds. Fairy Xingyu took the astrolabe, raised her slender hand, and pointed at different places on the astrolabe. The astrolabe emitted several layers of obscure fluctuations, directing the birds to fly in an extremely zigzagging direction. However, after flying for hundreds of feet, the bird in front exploded with a boom. The birds behind it immediately flapped their tails and flew in another direction beautifully. The fierce inter-realm storm around them was like the night wind, causing the feathers of the birds to tremble slightly. Xiaohua and the others naturally followed the birds and flew in another direction. The six-star space fragment looked very close, but it was extremely far away. After flying for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, one of the hundreds of birds would be destroyed in a short while. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, there were less than 20 birds left. Looking at the six-star-shaped space fragment again, it seemed to still be flickering with faint starlight in the distance. Suji said in a low voice, "Every realm has an edge. There's never an endless thing. The reason why it feels endless is because you're in the realm. As long as you're in the realm, if you don't have a magical power that transcends the realm, even if you reach the edge of the realm, you still won't be able to see the realm. So, you'll feel that the realm is endless. These space fragments come from different realms. The aura of each realm is different, and the aura of the fragments won't merge. Therefore, you can see each space fragment as an independent realm. You're in the meteor belt, so you can also see a larger space fragment. If you can't find a way to enter the space fragment, it will always keep a distance from you." "Suji," Fairy Xingyu said with some dissatisfaction, "didn't you say that you can't reveal too much about the immortal divinity? You can't reveal too much about the immortal realm to Xiaohua. How can you casually tell Xiaohua about the immortal realm? This is just to broaden his horizons. It's not considered teaching him the mysteries of the immortal realm," Suji said disapprovingly. "Besides, he's already seen the seven-colored shell. Do you think he didn't get anything from it?" "Hee." Xiaohua smiled and asked, "Fairy, I have a question, but I don't know if I should ask it." "Don't ask." Fairy Xingyu hurriedly waved her hand and said, "Your question must involve the immortal realm again." "Okay then." Xiaohua shrugged and immediately stopped asking. However, a smile had already appeared at the corner of his mouth. Sure enough, after a while, Fairy Xingyu urged again, "What are you asking? Why aren't you talking?" "Hee." Xiaohua blinked and asked, "Senior, you came from the Palace of Justice. You must know the various realms very well?" "I don't know." Fairy Xingyu shook her head like a rattle drum. "I'm just occasionally ordered by the Palace of Justice to check some things. I've met the demon clan of the 10,000 demon realm who broke through the realms in the Dawn Rain continent. I've also met the seven-colored sea god shell from the Red Sea domain in the Thousand Demons sacred realm. Well, the two seniors are also from the immortal realm. I'm very curious. Why is it so easy to break through the realms?" Xiaohua ignored Fairy Xingyu's shaking of her head and asked seriously, "Didn't Senior Su just say that it's difficult to break through the realms in the realms? It's naturally difficult to break through the ordinary realms, but the three continents are a bit special." Fairy Xingyu was a female immortal after all, so she couldn't help showing off a little. However, she only said half a sentence and stopped. She raised her hand and pointed at the six-star space fragment that still looked very far away. "Look again. Is it close to that space fragment?" "Okay." Xiaohua knew that Fairy Xingyu wouldn't say anything else, so he had no choice but to prepare to activate his Delusion Breaker Dharma Eye. However, before he activated it, he suddenly thought of something and said with a smile, "Fairy, I don't know any special spells. Of course, I can't see any clues. Everything still depends on your magic power." Fairy Xingyu glanced at Xiaohua and rolled her eyes at him. Then, she spat out a mouthful of quintessential essence at the astrolabe in her hand. Swoosh! A pillar of stars rushed out of the astrolabe and caught up with the few remaining birds in front of them. Caw! The birds cried out sadly and turned into fireflies. Then, the entire pillar of stars swept toward the space fragment like a whirlwind. Poof, poof, poof. The sound of explosions came from the pillar of stars. The aura of the realms had hit the pillar of stars and made it full of holes. However, the shattered pillar of stars also revealed a safe path at this time and fell into the brilliance of the space fragment. Suji was still in front. His figure followed the pillar of stars and fell into the brilliance. Xiaohua could clearly see that Suji's figure was getting smaller and smaller. Xiaohua watched Suji's figure shrink. Outside the meteor belt in the distance, the fat figure of the Grand Mist Ancestor appeared again. The Grand Mist Ancestor squinted and watched Xiaohua and the other two shrink and fall into the hexagonal space fragment with a solemn expression on his face. Chapter 45:12. The Grand Mist Ancestor originally wanted to fly over and enter the meteor belt with Xiaohua and the others. However, when he saw Suji spurting out immortal spiritual energy and activating the astrolabe, he stopped in the distance. It was only when Xiaohua and the others flew in that he quickly flew over. He looked at the backs of the three people and thought to himself, although this person looks a little unfamiliar, the way he activates the astrolabe is exactly the same as that person. If I'm not mistaken, it's him. Humph. Since he's still alive, why didn't he save me? This kind of senior. It's fine if I don't recognize him. With that thought, the Grand Mist Ancestor waved his fat monk robe. Two balls of black and white air flew out and turned into thousands of thin threads in the meteor belt. These thin threads seemed to have intelligence and were rapidly drawn into the turbulent flow of the realm. They were either torn apart or moved against the flow. In just a moment, the turbulent flow that was invisible to the naked eye and divine sense was clearly revealed to the Grand Mist Ancestor. He watched as the black and white threads spread further and gradually covered the space fragments within a dozen li. The black and white threads were indeed effective. Wherever there was a dead end, the black and white threads would cut off randomly. Wherever there was a way out, the threads would rapidly extend and reveal the path of light. Seeing this, the Grand Mist Ancestor smiled proudly. This old man has the yin-yang illustration manual. In this star-moon palace, there's nothing that can stop me. With that said, the Grand Mist Ancestor's figure flickered as he stepped onto the black and white thread. The black and white thread immediately turned into a cloud that carried him towards the nearest light path. When the Grand Mist Ancestor's figure gradually shrank, the figures of the scholarly cultivators and the great monsters of the demon race appeared. Xiaohua followed Fairy Xingyu and flew along the Pillar of Stars. The Pillar of Stars in front of the realm's aura presented a very strange, distorted shape. It was like a fried dough twist with 6 revolutions. 3 of the revolutions were blurry and indistinguishable by the time they reached the space. The remaining 3 were crooked as they probed into the space's brilliance. As for the Pillar of Stars, it was destroyed by the realm's aura. In front of the 2 was Suji. Suji seemed to be very familiar with this situation. Without any hesitation, not only did he fly with the Pillar of Stars, he also spun with the Pillar of Stars. In fact, there were many times when he was still facing down in Xiaohua's eyes. Xiaohua didn't dare to act rashly. His entire body followed the rotation of the star pillar. He didn't dare to be careless at all. After circling around a few times, Xiaohua suddenly heard a rumbling sound beside his ears. In a flash, the hexagonal spatial fragment that wasn't too far from him suddenly appeared in front of him. The hexagonal fragment had already disappeared, and what entered his eyes was only an enormous light shadow. This light shadow was like a huge dome of heaven, covering the entire space. Moreover, under this dome of heaven, there were several kinds of indescribable auras. These auras interweaved together, blocking the light shadow. However, within the light and shadow, the star pillar had already pierced into the light and shadow, and a series of phantoms that resembled doors appeared in the light and shadow. At this time, Suji had already stopped. His hands moved slightly, and streaks of water-blue thunderbolts appeared like horned dragons, slowly rolling up and down his body. Fairy Xingyu's face was also solemn. She raised her hand slightly, put away the astrolabe, and took out a magic weapon that looked like a crescent moon. The soft armor on her body also emitted starlight, and a faintly discernible restriction protected her body. Xiaohua, Suji called out without turning his head. Take out your magic weapon. I don't know what kind of space is inside this spatial fragment, and I don't know which realm this fragment came from. Yes. As Xiaohua spoke, he took out the Tongjiao shears from his bosom. Under the urging of his magic power, the entire Tongjiao shears emitted a dazzling golden light. Seeing this dazzling golden light swimming in Xiao Hua's hand like a dragon, Fairy Xingyu couldn't help but exclaim, "What a treasure! Xiao Hua, I really didn't expect you to have a capital spiritual treasure. It's a pity that this capital spiritual treasure is somewhat incomplete." "I was lucky," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "I snatched it from the Xiaoyu continent. That person took half of it that day, and I don't know where the other half is. It's good that you can use it." Suji didn't say much. He watched as the shadow of the star pillar crashed into the space, gradually solidified. He shouted, "Xingyue, Xiao Hua, let's rush in." "Okay." Fairy Xingyu and Xiao Hua shouted in unison, urging their figures to rush toward the shadow of the door at the same time. Boom! Just as Xiao Hua rushed into the light shadow, he felt that his surroundings were surrounded by clouds and mist, followed by the sound of thunder. Bolts of heavenly lightning fell on top of his head, like the Milky Way spilling out. Moreover, there was an inexplicable pressure on Xiao Hua's body. This pressure was so great that it felt as if the whole world was pressing down on his shoulders, making it difficult for him to move. However, this was nothing. The strangest thing was that in addition to the heavy pressure on Xiao Hua's body, there were also tens of millions of tiny vortexes trying to drill into Xiao Hua's body. A sour and painful feeling came from his body. "Humph!" Xiao Hua snorted coldly and urged his transcendent's golden body. While his body was flowing with golden light, his figure continued to expand. Swish, swish. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to straighten his back, two silvery white human-shaped lights that were at least 3,000 meters long appeared in front of his head. Moreover, from those lights, there was a kind of pressure that made Xiao Hua feel fear. It surged towards Xiao Hua like a surging tide, blocking Xiao Hua's mouth and nose. Moreover, the pressure was like a mountain pressing down. Xiao Hua's Mahayana cultivator's pressure couldn't help but be stimulated, and he tried his best to resist. However, this pressure was nothing more than a pellet in front of the mountain-like pressure. There was no way it could compare at all. Large beads of sweat dripped down from Xiao Hua's temples. Xiao Hua's straight body was slightly bent as an irresistible fear arose spontaneously. This is the fragment of the immortal realm? Fairy Xingyu was a little puzzled, a little surprised, and screamed with ecstasy. "Don't be in such a hurry to look at the fragment." Suji's calm voice sounded. "We didn't expect that the first fragment to be the same space as the immortal realm. Our top priority now is to quickly stabilize the immortal qi in our bodies. Don't strengthen it anymore, or our bodies won't be able to support it. Oh, quickly restrain your pressure. Xiao Hua doesn't have any consciousness, so he can't resist our spiritual pressure." As he spoke, the mountain-like pressure gradually shrank and fell into the silvery light. Only then did Xiao Hua breathe a sigh of relief. He opened his mouth to say something in a hoarse voice, but the abundant immortal qi rushed into his mouth and nose again. This immortal qi was of a much higher level than the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the three continents. When it rushed into Xiao Hua's mouth and nose, it immediately caused discomfort in his body. He didn't know how many years he had not felt choking on water, but it rushed into his head. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly held his breath and condensed his qi, urging the Dharma power in his body to create a defense on the surface of his body. Before he could urge his Dharma power, Suji's voice sounded from the silvery light. His voice was like a thunderclap that resounded through the entire space. "Xiao Hua, don't urge your Dharma power. All your spells now are based on the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the three continents. This is a fragment of the realm similar to the immortal realm. The immortal qi inside is similar to the immortal realm. When this immortal qi comes into contact with spells based on the yuan qi of heaven and earth, it will change. If it's light, it will destroy the spell. If it's heavy, it will cause a backlash and invade your body." "Okay." Xiao Hua didn't speak and hurriedly nodded. Then, from another silvery human figure, an object that emitted the brilliance of the stars and moon flew out. Fairy Xingyu's voice also sounded from it. "Humph, I hate stingy people like you the most. I don't believe that you don't have a protective heavenly spiritual treasure. If it weren't for the fact that this is a fragment of the immortal realm, and I'm afraid that your body would explode from the immortal qi, I wouldn't have bothered to give you my immortal armor." The object landed in front of Xiaohua. It was a very simple and crude star armor. This star armor was refined from some strange star stones. Between the star stones were some crystal threads that were as thin as hair. These crystal threads not only strung the star stones together, but they also flashed with traces of cold light, looking very sharp. Xiaohua took the star armor and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After all, this was Fairy Xingyu's star armor. How could he, a male cultivator, wear it? This suspicion, he still had to avoid it. You can't activate this star armor now? Suji's voice sounded. Put it on first. I'll activate it for you. Since Suji didn't say anything, Xiaohua could only obey. He threw the star armor, which fell like a fishing net. The 100 or so star stones on the star armor covered Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua deliberately looked at his chest. Fortunately, there weren't any extra star stones. Gotcha. Hundreds of silver-white thunderbolts appeared in the silver figure that Suji was in and gathered on every star stone on the star armor. Rumble. The star armor actually rumbled like a Dharma treasure. The 100 or so star stones turned into the shape of stars and began to rotate. The immortal chi nearby also let out a cheerful cry and crashed into the stars. In just a moment, the stars turned into pieces and the entire star armor turned into a strange armor that covered Xiaohua's body. Once the armor was formed, the corrosion from the immortal chi disappeared immediately. The corrosion on his mouth and nose also disappeared. Xiaohua looked at the armor that was flowing with starlight and moved his hands and feet. He frowned slightly. This was because his body didn't have any special discomfort in the ruins or the primitive continent. Why were there so many abnormalities in this fragment of the immortal realm? Gotcha. Xiaohua's problem was solved. Tens of thousands of tiny thunderbolts appeared around the silver figure that Suji was in. These thunderbolts were like horned dragons that surrounded the silver figure and rotated crazily. The silver figure also gradually shrank with the rotation of the thunderbolts. At the same time, a resplendent galaxy flew out from the silver figure of another silver figure and also rotated from top to bottom. Every time it rotated, some of the silver light fell into the galaxy. The silver light that was thousands of feet in size shrank almost simultaneously with Suji's silver light. Chapter 45:13. After the time it took to burn an incense stick, Suji and Fairy Xingyu's bodies were revealed again, but this time, they were different from before. Not only were there silver scars all over their bodies, but there were also lightning and starlight flowing through these scars, as if they were trying to stop these scars from spreading. The armor that they had worn before was also faintly flashing between the silver spots, looking erratic. The strangest thing was their faces. In the beginning, their faces were replaced by a flickering silver light. Later on, their faces gradually appeared. However, some parts of their faces were that of humans, while some parts were covered by silver light. It looked extremely strange. In the end, their faces were completely revealed. However, from time to time, their faces would be covered by the silver light. When their faces were revealed, there was nothing special about them. However, when they were covered by the silver light, a kind of majesty and respect was involuntarily emitted, forcing Xiaohua to move slightly. Presumably, behind the star armor, Xiaohua slightly narrowed his eyes and thought to himself, "This is the true appearance of an immortal." Phew! Suji let out a long breath, looking even more nervous than Xiaohua. Fairy Xingyu raised her arm, shook it a few times, and said, "This body is really tiring. The feeling of freedom just now was really good." Yes, Suji nodded. When we were in the immortal realm, we never felt that there was anything abnormal about it. But after leaving the immortal realm, we realized the benefits of an immortal body. There's a saying in my hometown, when you're not sick, you're not sick. When you're sick, you realize the importance of health. Let's go quickly, Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. I can't wait. This time, we have to find the passage back to the immortal realm no matter what. Xiaohua. Suji nodded, looked at Xiaohua, and asked, "Can you still adapt?" "It's okay for now." Xiaohua nodded. "However, I don't know what role I can play in this fragment of the immortal realm. In this fragment of the immortal realm, you're just a mortal, Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. Your magic arts, magic treasures, and other things can't be used. Even if it could be used, its effect would not be comparable to an immortal artifact. Oh, don't rashly open your Chinkuan pouch here. Be careful that the immortal spiritual energy inside your Chinkuan pouch will burst. As for your Kunlun mirror, it should be usable, but I can't guarantee that it won't be damaged if you don't refine it with immortal qi. Forget it. Forget it. Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, just treat me as an idle person. With 2 real immortals following me, what do I have to be afraid of? Hee hee. Fairy Xingyue covered her mouth and giggled. Then let's make a cupboard. After saying that, Fairy Xingyu released her lingering thoughts, wanting to look into the distance. Suji hurriedly stopped her and said, Xingyue, it's better to be careful. Don't release too many lingering thoughts. Got it. Goddess Xingyu smiled sweetly. Coincidentally, her appearance was covered by the silver light. A sweet smile seemed to pass through the space and into Xiao Hua's mind. Fairy Xingyu did not release her lingering thoughts into the distance. Her figure flew slowly. Suji waved his sleeve and covered Xiao Hua's body. He said, let's go, and followed Fairy Xingyu. After flying for a while, Fairy Xingyu released her star shuttle with a wave of her hand. At this time, the star shuttle was even more majestic than before. Tens of thousands of starlight rushed into the sky and fell in all directions, like a dazzling meteor shower. However, after a while, the starlight withered and disappeared into thin air. Fairy Xingyu's face changed drastically as she looked at Suji. Suji frowned slightly but did not care. He raised his hand and pointed ahead. The 2 of them flew over with Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua looked a little absent-minded. He did not pay attention to Fairy Xingyu's star shuttle. He was puzzled by the smile that Fairy Xingyu transmitted into his mind. What are immortals? I have never seen immortals before, so I have never thought about this question. Now that these 2 exiled immortals have been here for a long time, they feel that immortals are similar to us. But today, when I really came to the fragment of the immortal world, I realized that immortals are completely different from us mortals. In Tao sect cultivation, the physical body is extremely important. It is also the foundation of becoming an immortal. Without a physical body, one cannot ascend to the immortal world. Previously, I thought that it was because the immortal spirit qi was different from the heaven and earth origin qi. If it were not for the protection of the physical body, the nascent soul would be destroyed by the immortal spirit qi. But now, it seems that if the physical body has not been cleansed by the spirit cleansing pool, it cannot withstand the immortal spirit qi. Then, how can I protect my nascent soul? Moreover, Suji had said before that even if I lost my physical body, as long as I cultivated my scattered soul to the 9 tribulations, I would be able to grow a physical body. Naturally, I would be able to enter the spirit cleansing pool and grow a physical body. It seems that the spirit cleansing pool is the most important thing. The spirit cleansing liquid in the spirit cleansing pool. What is it? What is the difference between it and the dragon cleansing liquid in the dragon cleansing pool? Xiao Hua's question could only be a question. Not to mention that he could not find any answers now. Even if he asked Suji, Suji would probably not answer him. However, in a short moment, he had a new question. He looked at the ground that whistled past. On the ground, there were either deep ravines or undulating mountain ranges. It seemed that everything on the ground was much larger than the 3 continents. He asked curiously, Senior. Junior has 2 questions to ask. Suji looked ahead and answered expressionlessly. Senior said before that the so-called realm, as long as one is within it, one will not be able to see the edge. We've entered this spatial fragment, so how can we find the way out? Xiao Hua asked. The spatial fragments in the meteor belt are all incomplete. They were used by people with great ability to set up defenses when the Star Moon Palace was refined in the ancient times. Once we find the location of the other incomplete part of the spatial fragment, we will be able to see the meteor belt. From there, we can fly to the other spatial fragment. Suji answered fluently. However, he stopped at this point, as if there were some secrets that he did not say. Xiao Hua nodded and asked again. Senior said that there are fragments of realms parallel to the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm, fragments of realms parallel to the immortal realm, and fragments of realms parallel to the ancient times. This time, when we enter the fragment of realms parallel to the immortal realm, the immortal chi inside is extremely dense. Even with Junior's strength, I can't withstand it. How can the cultivators who followed Senior in the past withstand it? Actually, it's like this, Suji said without any hesitation. Although I don't have a space or a spatial immortal weapon, I still have the heaven and earth bracelet. Under normal circumstances, I respect the wishes of those cultivators and bring them here to gain experience. If an accident really happens, I will definitely keep them in the heaven and earth bracelet. Although staying in the heaven and earth bracelet is an insult to the human race, it's still better than losing their lives. Of course, if I didn't make it in time, like just now, they would have lost their lives. I don't have any good ideas. After all, Xingyu's star armor isn't something that just anyone can borrow. Oh, also, Suji continued, previously, we also encountered some fragments of realms parallel to the immortal realm. However, the immortal chi inside those fragments was already thin. Although it was somewhat dangerous, it was far from being as serious as today. Also, Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked again. Didn't you have 2 questions? Suji asked curiously. Xiaohua smiled. Junior has thought of another problem. Say it. Suji nodded. Know what you know. Don't know what you don't know. You are suitable to be a Confucian cultivator. Senior said so. Xiaohua asked, there are also fragments of realms parallel to the ancient times. Then, the immortal realm should be of a higher level than the immortal realm, right? Yes, the immortal realm usually calls the immortal realm the immortal realm. Suji replied. Then, Xiaohua asked, Senior and the others entered the fragment of the immortal realm. Did their bodies feel uncomfortable? What about those lower-level disciples? At this moment, Suji showed a rare hesitation. After a moment, Suji opened his mouth. Xiaohua, this question, I can answer you. But I don't know if my answer is correct because I have never been to the immortal realm and I don't know what the ancient times were like. I also don't know what the ancient times were like when the Star Moon Palace was refined. I only know that some fragments are similar to the 3 continents and the realms below the immortal realm. Some fragments are similar to the immortal realm, the Demon League, and the Heavenly Court. And some fragments are different from these 2 places. So Xingyue and I think, listen carefully, we think that these fragments might be fragments of the ancient times. But whether these fragments are fragments of the ancient times or not, we don't know. And in these fragments, our bodies didn't change, and the bodies of those lower-level disciples didn't change either. I also don't know what I am talking about. Do you understand? Yes, Junior understands. Although the doubts in Xiaohua's heart grew stronger, he still heaved a sigh of relief. Are you sure you understand? Suji asked curiously. I won't hide it from you. I thought about this before, but this matter has nothing to do with cultivation and returning to the immortal realm. I just thought about it and threw it away. This Junior thinks so too. Xiaohua said with a smile. This Junior just had a sudden whim. Then, the 2 of them fell silent. They flew forward silently. Xiaohua didn't know what Suji was thinking, but he knew that although Suji was an immortal, Suji didn't understand the ancient times as well as Xiaohua. Not only had Xiaohua been to the immortal realm, but Xiaohua's Fortune Gate disciples had also been there. When those 5th grade Essence Force disciples were in the immortal realm, their bodies didn't go through any special tempering, and they also didn't experience the same problem as today. And Xiaohua's body, which was a half-god body, was actually corroded by the immortal spiritual energy. This was something that Xiaohua couldn't understand. Chapter 45:14. After a long while, Fairy Xingyu saw some colorful lights filling the sky in front of her. She said in surprise, Suji, look, there is still light in this space fragment. Maybe there is an ancient cave residence. Our opportunity has come. Don't be careless, Suji hurriedly reminded her. The more abodes there are, the more celestial beasts there will be. You must be careful. I know. Do I need you to tell me that? Fairy Xingyu said indifferently and sped up again. As if reminded by the light, Suji hesitated and said, Xiaohua, I think the problem you mentioned just now is like this. Before Taoist cultivators ascend to become celestials, they rely on the chi of heaven and earth to cultivate. When they reach the celestial realm, they will not be able to adapt to the celestial spiritual chi. As for the celestials in the celestial realm, low-level celestials such as mortal fairies also rely on the celestial spiritual chi to cultivate. When they reach the high level, they will no longer rely on the celestial spiritual chi. Presumably, in the untainted divine realm, the foundation of cultivation is also different. Therefore, the cultivators will be troubled by the celestial spiritual chi in the fragment of the celestial realm. But in the fragment of the untainted divine realm, there will be no such confusion, right? What do high-level celestials rely on to cultivate? Xiaohua asked, hitting the nail on the head. Alas, that's why I don't want to answer your question. Su Ji sighed. You haven't cultivated to that level yet. It's really not good for you to know too much. After that, Su Ji stopped talking and flew ahead with Xiaohua. Xiaohua had no choice but to shut up. After another 10 minutes, the light was in sight. Under the light, there was neither a spiritual vein nor an abode, but a vast expanse of tall palaces that stretched as far as the eye could see. These palaces were tens of thousands of feet tall, but all of them were damaged or collapsed. If it weren't for the extremely beautiful light emitted by these palaces, they wouldn't be much different from the ruins of the mortal world. As they flew closer, Xiaohua saw that the ground around the palaces was covered with deep cracks and deep holes. These cracks and deep holes were obviously caused by a fight. Next to these cracks, there were some broken celestial artifacts scattered around. Fairy Xingyu looked at Su Ji in surprise. Su Ji also looked surprised. The two of them sped up again. Hiss! In just a moment, not to mention Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu, even Xiaohua could not help but gasp, because right before the overturned wreckage, there were already many wreckages of several thousand feet in length lying on the ground. These corpses were different from the corpses of the human clan. Most of them were wearing armors and holding some fairy weapons in their hands. Inside the armors, there was either nothing, or some shells that looked like tree roots. Of course, there were also some corpses that had collapsed beyond recognition. Something's wrong. Su Ji suddenly growled. He raised his hand, and a spear-like immortal artifact fell into his hand. He glanced at the bottom of the immortal artifact and exclaimed, Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion? How is this possible? Fairy Xingyu exclaimed as if she had seen a ghost. She also raised her hand, and another empty armor fell into her hand. When she looked at the mark on the inside of the armor, her face was as incredulous as Su Ji's. How is this possible? Then, Su Ji threw Xiaohua to the ground and said, Stay here and don't move. Remember, don't move. This is very important. After that, without waiting for Xiaohua to answer, he rushed toward the dilapidated palaces in the distance. Of course, Fairy Xingyu was no exception. Her figure flashed, faster than the light shadow, almost surpassing Su Ji's figure. Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion? Xiaohua naturally heard Su Ji's exclamation. He did not understand what this Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion was. However, judging from the reactions of the two immortals, one was a law enforcer and the other was a law enforcer. This so-called Heavenly Mansion was definitely a famous place in the immortal realm. Moreover, since the two immortals did not want to go in with him, there must be some so-called secret of the immortal realm inside. Xiaohua naturally knew to stay where he was. Of course, Xiaohua only stood there for a moment before he came to his senses. Damn it, that's not right. This Xingyu palace was refined in ancient times. Since Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu know about this Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion, this space fragment must have been left behind from the immortal realm in ancient times. In that case, thinking of this, a smile appeared on Xiaohua's face. In that case, this Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion must be a secret place in ancient times. There are endless secrets hidden inside. Damn it, this space fragment is a huge gold mine. Since I've already entered the gold mine, how can I return empty-handed? Since he knew that this collapsed palace was a famous secret of the immortal realm in ancient times, how could Xiaohua still stand in the distance obediently? He rolled his eyes and activated the flying technique of the soul cultivator. He stuck close to the ground and walked to another place. As he walked, he sensed his own space. Sure enough, as Fairy Xingyu had said, he could already sense his space here. Everything in the space could be taken out. Xiao Hua even tried to put an empty armor and immortal weapon into the space. He could do the same. However, the armor and immortal weapon were not located in the original Shenhua continent. Therefore, Xiao Hua kept some armor and immortal weapons into the space as he walked. Xiao Hua also noticed some things like bracelets, rings, and storage bags. He did not even look at them. They were all put into the space. Xiao Hua was already used to stealing things. It had even become a technique. There were many bodies lying on the ground outside the palace. They were either dense or sparse. When they were sparse, Xiao Hua only took those bracelets, belts, and the like. When they were dense, Xiao Hua took 4 out of 10 of them. This made it so that the density would become sparse and not arouse suspicion. Damn, these are all immortal weapons. The more Xiao Hua walked, the more excited he became. This feeling of reaping without sowing was really rare and wonderful. However, after walking for a while, he didn't see Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu. Xiao Hua walked to the other side of the hall. When he got there, Xiao Hua suddenly stopped. He closed his eyes and seemed to be thinking. After a moment, he suddenly looked into the distance and thought to himself, "That's not right. Previously, in front of the palace, those armors. Oh, I'll take it as the place where the immortals fell. The immortals seem to have fallen in one direction, as if in the direction where I came from. These immortals seem to be blocking another pair of immortals. The direction of these immortals was similar to the direction where I came from. Moreover, there are more belts and rings here. These immortal weapons are also of a higher level. Could it be? Could it be?" Thinking about this, Xiao Hua wanted to release his divine sense, but after a short moment, Xiao Hua shrugged his shoulders and said with a low chuckle, "This Xiao came here as a mortal. Not only do I have no divine sense, I also have no magic power. I can't even open the storage pouch. All the strange things that have happened here have nothing to do with me. No matter what happens, I'm the most innocent." Xiao Hua smiled. He carefully identified the direction and walked in one direction. Along the way, he used his mind to store all the immortal weapons, armors, and immortal slips into his space. Sure enough, in the time it took to finish a meal, a bottomless abyss appeared in front of them. Within the abyss, there were many 5-colored clouds. Amidst the clouds, 2 lights that were brighter than the sun floated within the abyss, illuminating the entire abyss. However, the clouds blocked the lights, so they could not be seen from a distance. Oh my God! As soon as Xiao Hua approached the abyss, he immediately felt the spiritual pressure in the light shadow that was even more vast than that of Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu. Xiao Hua felt as if a heavy hammer had hit his chest. He could not get close at all. "This is a big fish." Xiao Hua was overjoyed and almost screamed. These must be 2 big shots who fought to the death. Xiao Hua did not hesitate and hurriedly released his mind. Sure enough, the spiritual pressure was like a mountain or an ocean, but Xiao Hua's mind could still get close. Of course, Xiao Hua's mind was just a trickle that could only flow around the light shadow. Even so, Xiao Hua could already see that these were 2 shells that were tens of thousands of feet in size. The shells were full of a mixture of golden and silver light. There were also 2 immortal weapons in the light shadow. One was shaped like a knife, and the other was shaped like a spear. However, Xiao Hua's mind could not get close to these 2 immortal weapons. "Damn it, you're already dead. Why are you still so stingy?" Xiao Hua knew that these 2 immortals who had perished together were definitely big shots in the immortal world. He gritted his teeth. It seemed that the immortal weapons and other items that he had collected earlier were all scrap metal. "No," Xiao Hua shouted inwardly. "Even if this is a tiger, this Xiao will still pluck the fur from the tiger's tail." Thinking about this, Xiao Hua's mind flowed like a stream between the tens of thousands of feet large shell and the armor. His mind, was like a sympathetic person's hand that was extremely affectionate as it gently wandered around the wreckage. It was unwilling to cross over inch by inch. Haha. When Xiao Hua's mind passed through the armor and landed on the belt, Xiao Hua's mind saw something that looked like a jade seal. Xiao Hua did not hesitate at all. His mind moved like a hand, and immediately put the jade seal into the space. Immediately after, a thumb-sized jade pillar and a pitch-black box were also put into the space by Xiaohua. When Xiaohua's mind was ready to leave the wreckage, he saw a pendant hanging on the belt. Xiaohua put away the pendant, but he still wanted more. Damn it, if I'm not afraid of being discovered by Suji, this belt, tisk, forget it. The other wreckage was similar to this one. It also had a lot of harvest. In addition to the golden seal, there was also a pendant, a 5-claw-like pendant, a multi-pronged jade pillar, and a simple and unadorned key. Chapter 45:15. Phew. After looting the wreckage, Xiaohua let out a long breath and said with a smile, "Finally, this trip was not in vain." In order not to arouse Suji and Fairy Xingyu's suspicion, Xiaohua hurriedly turned around and wanted to leave. However, just as he turned around, he suddenly froze on the spot. He hurriedly released his mind in disbelief. Sure enough, a moment later, Xiaohua revealed a thoughtful expression and thought to himself, "It's a little strange. These two unknown immortals had clearly perished together. However, one of them is holding a weapon in both hands, the other is holding a weapon in one hand, and the other hand. Why is it covering his back armpit? His back armpit is obviously not injured. So why is he covering it there? There must be something he cares about there. Even if he dies, he must protect it." Thinking about this, Xiaohua urged his mind and moved the immortal's hand away and placed it on the ground. Then, his mind penetrated into the armpit of the immortal. It was very strange. The immortal's body was different from the mortal's body. When Xiaohua's mind penetrated into the armpit, the immortal's body actually split open as if it was melting. Then, a 9-colored brilliance bloomed. Within the brilliance, an indescribable polyhedron appeared. It seemed to be in this space, but also seemed to not be in this space. Of course, this brilliance flashed, and the polyhedron was immediately taken into the space by Xiaohua. This polyhedron was different from the fairy artifacts that Xiaohua had taken into the space before. It fell into the space that had not been formed before. Seeing that the treasure was in his hands, Xiaohua did not delay at all. He turned around and went to other places to continue searching for armor, fairy artifacts, belts, and other things. Xiaohua originally thought that Suji and Fairy Xingyu would find him soon. However, what puzzled him was that Suji and Fairy Xingyu did not appear for a full hour. Could it be that there is an even more powerful restriction in this palace? Xiaohua looked at the palace in front of him. Although the huge stone pillars had collapsed, the beautiful stone walls were flashing with brilliance for a long time. Xiaohua had some thoughts in his mind. However, he was very self-aware. If Suji and Fairy Xingyu could not escape from the restriction in the palace, how could he? Since he was not empty-handed, why should he take the risk? Especially if there were taboos within this hall, then wouldn't he have touched the bottom line of the immortal dimension? Suji and Fairy Xingyu did not fall into a predicament like Xiaohua had imagined. They did not separate, but hurriedly shuttled through the collapsed and dilapidated hall side by side. There were also many corpses in the hall, as well as many precious weapons and other items. However, the two of them did not take a second look at them. They did not dare to release too much of their expanded thoughts and only extended them out a few hundred feet. However, their eyes were different at this time. One of Fairy Xingyu's eyes was like a full moon, while the other was like a bright star. Suji's eyes flashed with lightning. The two of them looked at each other with different gazes, as if they were searching for something. They flew into a huge palace. In this palace, there was a huge chair that had been split in half. On the stone wall above the chair, there was a plaque that gave off a milky white light. This plaque was now hanging at a slanted angle, and most of it was already broken. The gazes of the two landed on the signboard at the same time. Their bodies shook violently. At the same time, the silver light hidden under the armor involuntarily rushed out and wrapped around the bodies of the two. A moment later, the figures and faces of the two were once again revealed. Fairy Xingyu was shocked. She rushed to the front of the throne and wanted to take a closer look. However, before she could get close, the throne that had been split in half gave off an awe-inspiring aura, forcing Fairy Xingyu to retreat. She couldn't get close to the throne at all. Fairy Xingyu had no choice but to fly high and try her best to get close to the plaque on the stone wall. After taking a closer look, Fairy Xingyu's body stiffened. After a long while, she whispered, "How is this possible? This is really the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion, the most mysterious immortal mansion of the legendary Yiqiong. This immortal mansion, isn't it in the immortal realm? How did it become a realm fragment of Star Moon Palace? Could it be that the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion disappeared in ancient times? That's even more impossible." Su Ji shook his head and said, "Yiqiong is a celestial venerable who became a celestial venerable recently before we fell into the mortal world. His Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion only appeared in the last 20 million years. How could it have disappeared in ancient times? Unless there was another Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion in ancient times, there's no other explanation for it being in Star Moon Palace." Fairy Xingyu deduced without hesitation. Su Ji nodded and said, "That's possible. No one can guarantee that there wasn't another Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion in ancient times. But, Fairy Xingyu hesitated a few times, and her face was full of doubts. She did not say the reason for the but. There seemed to be endless hesitation in her heart. Su Ji seemed to know what Fairy Xingyu wanted to say. He looked at Fairy Xingyu and opened his mouth, but in the end, he sighed and closed his mouth. Finally, Fairy Xingyu probed, "Su Ji, you've been following me since we entered this heavenly mansion. Are you afraid that there are restrictions in this heavenly mansion and want to protect me?" Su Ji shook his head and said, "This heavenly mansion has been destroyed. How could there be restrictions? Moreover, the heavenly mansion is full of celestial generals who have been killed. Even if there were restrictions, I'm afraid they would have been triggered by them. However, I don't want to be separated from you because I want to protect you. At the same time, I'm also protecting myself." Alas, that's right. Fairy Xingyu also understood what Su Ji meant, but she still did not want to make it clear. She sighed and said, "In that case, you and I, in this heavenly mansion, we can't be separated." "Yes." Su Ji smiled bitterly. "We'll search together and then come here. Then we'll be honest. That's the only way." Fairy Xingyu's smile became even more bitter. It seemed that if she was given another chance, she would definitely not enter this space fragment so easily. Afterwards, the two of them spent another hour walking through most of the halls. Afterwards, they did not touch any of the items or corpses in the halls, and they returned to the main hall. Looking at the throne again, Su Ji said, "Xingyu, I think we're in big trouble." "Alas, yes." Fairy Xingyu stamped her feet in midair and said, "This is indeed the mysterious Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion that is widely rumored in the celestial realm. But this heavenly mansion, why would it be in the ancient Star Moon Palace?" "The ancient Star Moon Palace?" Su Ji said with a faint smile. "Who told you this? I'm afraid you came up with it yourself, right?" "Why not?" Fairy Xingyu frowned and said, "Although we found this Star Moon Palace first, the token to open this Star Moon Palace can also be found in the 3 continents. This means that before we came, the Star Moon Palace already existed and someone had already entered. It's just that they probably didn't have your divination skills. After they came in occasionally, they couldn't find any trace of the Star Moon Palace. Even so, it doesn't mean that the Star Moon Palace existed in ancient times, nor does it mean that the space fragments in this meteor belt were refined in the Star Moon Palace in ancient times." Su Ji explained, "This Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion is the best proof. The Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion must have fallen into the Star Moon Palace within 1,000,000 years." Okay. Fairy Xingyu was impatient and waved her hand. "What's the use of saying this now? Let's find the divine cultivation mirror first." "The problem is," Su Ji looked worried, "the divine cultivation mirror is just a legend. Who knows if it really exists? Even immortal King Tu Gong has never admitted it." "Su Ji, do you know that there's no smoke without fire?" Fairy Xingyu said, "If Heavenly Venerate Yiqiong wasn't immortal King Tu Gong's most trusted Heavenly Venerate, and if he didn't steal the divine cultivation mirror, how could this legend have spread in the celestial realm? If it weren't for this legend, how could the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion disappear from the celestial realm? Even the Palace of Law doesn't know where the Yiqiong Heavenly Mansion is." "I think," Su Ji shook his head and said, It's better if we don't look for it. How about we pretend that we never came here at all? How is that possible? Fairy Xingyu smiled bitterly and shook her head. From the moment we saw the Yiqiong heavenly mansion, it was already difficult for us to escape from this strange vortex in the celestial realm. If you don't say it, I won't say it. Well, Xiaohua won't say it either. Plus, he doesn't know where this place is. Even if we return to the celestial realm, who would know that we came to the Yiqiong heavenly mansion? Suji said sincerely. Suji, I believe you. I also believe that you will never tell anyone. Fairy Xingyu shook her head. But I don't trust Xiaohua. This guy has too many secrets. I can't guarantee that after he ascends to the celestial realm and hears the legend, he won't think of this place. Plus, I don't believe in myself. If the Palace of Law wants to know what we have done in the mortal world all these years, they won't be able to see what we have seen here. But, Suji said earnestly, if we start looking for it, regardless of whether we find it or not, we will be killed. If we find it, we won't be killed. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. If we can't find it, we may not be punished. But if we don't find it, we may be guilty of a great crime. According to the legend, the cultivation mirror is the supreme cultivation method that can make one become a god. Whether you find it or not, it will be troublesome. Suji tried to persuade her again. He knew very well that if Fairy Xingyu found the cultivation mirror, she would definitely give it to the Celestial Master of Law. If the Celestial Master of Law wanted to keep this secret, he would have to kill Fairy Xingyu. However, if Fairy Xingyu couldn't find the cultivation mirror and any immortals knew that she had come to the Yiqiong heavenly mansion, they would definitely suspect that Fairy Xingyu had secretly kept the cultivation mirror. The wisest thing to do was to immediately leave this place and never mention this matter again. Even if the Celestial Masters or Celestial Kings searched their souls in the future, they could still maintain their innocence. Chapter 45:16. Yes, I know. Suji nodded. He flew to a corpse and released his extended thought to examine it carefully. Fairy Xingyu always said that Xiaohua was stingy and greedy. Now, it was her turn. She was much slower than Xiaohua. After a while, her celestial artifact could not hold too much. When she wanted to look for the storage celestial artifacts on the corpses, she found that most of the corpses did not have any storage celestial artifacts. Fairy Xingyu did not wait any longer. She threw away some of the low-quality celestial artifacts she had obtained earlier and put in better ones. Even so, looking at the many celestial artifacts in front of her that she could not take, Fairy Xingyu was very unhappy. Perhaps I should get Suji to collect more. Fairy Xingyu looked up at Suji, who was not far away. However, after watching for a moment, she was a little surprised. This was because Suji was observing more than taking action. He seemed to be searching for something. Suji, why don't you take these things? Fairy Xingyu was a little puzzled. What are you looking for? Suji looked up and replied, I'm not looking for anything. I just feel that these corpses seem to have been moved by someone. The storage celestial artifacts are all gone. Moreover, the armor and weapons on these corpses are all from the Yiqiong heavenly mansion. We don't know how to refine celestial artifacts. Even if we take all these celestial artifacts, we can't use them. Instead of that, it's better to just take some as evidence. Even if you can't use them, you can take them to trade. Fairy Xingyu urged. We have been in the lower realm for so long that our cultivation can't catch up with our peers. If we don't get some elixirs and secret techniques, how can we cultivate to the celestial master level? Xingyu, Suji said, didn't you notice? Most of the corpses in the heavenly mansion have storage celestial artifacts. We can go back and take a few more. Fairy Xingyu blushed and said in a low voice, at that time, I was shocked and wanted to find the truth about the Yiqiong heavenly mansion. I didn't notice this. Suji nodded and looked up at one of the corpses. He raised his hand and grabbed it. A jet-black software flew out from the corpse. He looked around and said, this is not bad. It's perfect for Xiaohua to wear. Fairy Xingyu rolled her eyes at Suji and said, he has worn it. How can I take it? The star armor's quality is average. Just give it to him. Suji responded with boredom. He was about to lower his head to search again when suddenly, several thoughts that were very similar to Yin Yin's came from afar like a gust of wind. They swept across the abyss, the corpses, and landed on Suji and Fairy Xingyue. That well was incomparably cold, filled with bloodlust and brutality. When it landed on the two of them, silver light immediately erupted. Ing Yin? Suji was the first to sense it. His expression changed drastically as he exclaimed, "There's actually an immortal beast here?" Fairy Xingyue's face was also pale. She moved her body and said, "Of course there will be immortal beasts, but immortal beasts with telepathy. How can we resist them? Let's go." Io Xiaohua. Suji hurriedly followed Fairy Xingyue and flew into the divine palace. However, after flying for a while, he realized something. Xiaohua is still outside the divine palace. This little guy, Fairy Xingyue said angrily. Why didn't he wait in place? Why did he run? With that, the two of them moved like lightning in the direction of Xiaohua. The Yingnian that fell on them was still like the wind, closing in on them step by step. Xiaohua was easy to find. Following the footprints he left behind earlier, Suji only flew for half a cup of tea's time before he saw the high slope filled with corpses in front of him. Xiaohua was holding a rod-shaped immortal tool that was several hundred zhang in size in his hand. He was clumsily climbing up, wanting to climb up the high slope. However, some immortal tools on the high slope were in a mess. Xiaohua accidentally fell into a huge armor. Xiaohua. Suji was both angry and amused. Before he could get close, he shouted, "Come back quickly. There are immortal beasts around the divine palace." Io, Senior. Hearing Suji's voice, Xiaohua hurriedly turned around and waved the immortal weapon. "Look, what did I find? This immortal weapon is just right for me." "Idiot!" Fairy Xingyue shouted. "How can you touch the immortal weapon here? Why don't you put it down quickly?" Xiaohua was stunned and asked curiously, "Senior, didn't you say there were immortal beasts? Wouldn't it be better for me to have one for self-defense? Why do you want me to put it down?" As he spoke, Suji had already flown close. Without saying a word, he raised his hand and pointed a finger. A bolt of lightning fell on the immortal artifact, causing it to shrink abruptly. Then, he waved his sleeve and was about to take Xiaohua away. However, even though the immortal artifact in Xiaohua's hand had shrunk, it was still incomparably heavy. Suji's figure was pulled down while Xiaohua's figure only flew up a few feet. "Throw it away quickly," Fairy Xingyue said anxiously. "The immortal beasts are coming soon. We have to hide in the divine palace quickly. If you take this immortal weapon, Suji can't fly quickly." "No." Xiaohua refused without hesitation. He held the immortal weapon in his arms and said, "Without this immortal weapon, I am powerless. With this immortal weapon, I can resist the immortal beasts." "You? Who do you think you are?" Fairy Xingyue was furious. She raised her hand and a ray of starlight was about to strike down. She shouted, "Do you think this immortal beast is one of the 6 great sages of the 1,000 demons sacred realm? How can you be a match for an immortal beast?" "Xingyue," Suji shouted, "go back to the divine palace first and wait at the gate. I will fly back with Xiaohua." "You." Fairy Xingyue was a little flustered and exasperated. She really didn't understand why Suji indulged Xiaohua so much. In her eyes, Xiaohua was just a mortal. Even if he had an immortal weapon, he couldn't be a match for an immortal beast. Fairy Xingyue stomped her feet and turned around to fly away. However, she stopped again after flying 100 feet. She opened her mouth and the previous star shuttle flew out again. At this time, the star shuttle landed in the air. It was different from before. Layers of immortal spirit chi swarmed into it, and the entire star shuttle emitted a dreamy glow. In the air thousands of feet around the star shuttle, besides the immortal spirit chi, there was also a kind of frost-like cold air. Xiaohua thought that Fairy Xingyue was controlling the star shuttle to fly him and Suji. Unexpectedly, Fairy Xingyue raised her hand and pointed at the star shuttle. The star shuttle slowly rotated and hundreds of starlight rays emerged from the front of the star shuttle, piercing straight into the air. Fairy Xingyue turned her head and shouted, "Quick, I hope we can rush back to the divine palace before the immortal beast flies over. Go. Suji no longer waved his sleeve. Instead, he waved his hand. A bolt of lightning descended and sealed the space around Xiaohua. Then, with a loud roar, he grabbed the immortal artifact along with Xiaohua. His figure descended and flew towards the gate of the heavenly sanctum. Flying with Xiaohua and the immortal weapon was obviously a little too much for Suji. Big drops of sweat rolled down Suji's forehead, and the silver light under the armor rushed out several times. Xiaohua was also in a dilemma. He wanted to throw the immortal weapon away several times, but when he saw the solemn faces of Suji and Fairy Xingyue, he knew that the immortal beast that hadn't appeared yet must be very powerful. If he didn't have this immortal weapon, he would not only be food for the immortal beast, but also a burden to the two of them. Although Suji was a little tired now, it was better than losing his life later. Eowo! Suddenly, a strange beast roar sounded. When Xiaohua heard it, he couldn't help but tremble. Golden flowers appeared in front of his eyes, and sparks flew in all directions from his Naiwan palace. Fairy Xingyue and Suji's bodies glowed with silver light at the same time, protecting them. Xiaohua was below Suji. He could clearly see that when the silver light appeared, traces of blood seeped out of Suji's body. Nimbus Immortal Beast. Nimbus Immortal Beast. Fairy Xingyue panicked. How could there be a Nimbus Immortal Beast here? Although Suji also showed a rare trace of panic on his face, he replied calmly, "The space fragments here are different from the ones we encountered before. It's normal for immortal beasts to appear that are beyond imagination. The problem is," Fairy Xingyue urged the Star Shuttle and shouted, "if we were at our peak strength, we might be able to defeat this Nimbus Immortal Beast. But now, how can we resist this Nimbus Immortal Beast?" Divine Palace. Suji didn't mention the name of the Yiqiong Heavenly Palace. He only said that it was the Divine Palace path. We didn't see the Nimbus Immortal Beast around the Divine Palace before. This immortal beast must be afraid of the Divine Palace's restrictions. We can hide in the Divine Palace. That's the only way. Suji mentioned the Divine Palace again, as if to encourage Fairy Xingyue. Fairy Xingyue gritted her teeth and flew toward the gate of the Divine Palace. Xiaohua also frowned and asked in a low voice, "Senior, what kind of immortal beast is this Nimbus Immortal Beast? Why is it so powerful?" "It's not appropriate to mention it now," Suji said lightly. "When you see it, you'll naturally know. In fact, it doesn't have to be this Nimbus Immortal Beast. In other places outside the meteor belt, those immortal beasts are not as cruel and fierce as the Nimbus Immortal Beast. Ordinary cultivators are definitely no match for it." After saying that, Suji ignored Xiaohua and focused on flying toward the gate of the palace. A wool. Seeing the gate of the Divine Palace appear in front of her, Fairy Xingyue's face was filled with joy. Suddenly, she heard a roar coming from high up in the sky. Xiaohua looked up and saw three strange immortal beasts that were several hundred zhang in size, flying over like shooting stars. Before they could even get close, Xiaohua felt a chill in the surroundings, and a bloody smell emerged out of nowhere. Moreover, within the space, there were some faint spots that appeared. These spots were like ferocious eyes that stared at the three of them. Looking at the place where the clouds were surging, the so-called Nimbus Immortal Beast's figure was revealed. This immortal beast looked like a huge stork. There was a scarlet bulge on its head, and this bulge was covered with marks of different sizes. Around these marks, there was a boundless amount of immortal spiritual energy clustered around them. Chapter 45:17. The head of the flying dagger immortal beast was flat and slightly long, like several sickles tied together. Its long, flying sword-like beak was the blade of the sickle. The neck of the flying dagger immortal beast was extremely long, with several thick tendons entwined together. Below the neck was the body of the beast, which was covered with triangular scales. The edges of the scales were either covered with fiery red fine fur or flat feathers. Strings of sparks splashed out from within from time to time. Two pairs of bone wings stretched out from the waist of the flying dagger immortal beast. There were very few feathers on the bone wings, only some sharp protrusions. Every protrusion had a corresponding mark. The tail of the flying dagger immortal beast was also extremely long. This tail was segmented, and as it swung, layers of mysterious crimson runes emerged from the roots and surged to the tip of the tail. The tip of the tail had some fiery red markings. The markings seemed to be on the tip of the tail, but also seemed to be in the void. It gave off an unreal feeling. As for the abdomen of the flying dagger immortal beast, the 3 sharp claws that reached into the void occasionally slashed, creating cracks in the void. Damn it! Although he had not fought with the flying dagger immortal beast yet, Xiao Hua had already sensed its power. We should let the golden-winged great rock take a look at this place. If nothing goes wrong, even the first great saint of the demon clan may not be a match for this immortal beast. Senior. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. This is the rhythm of a dead man. I remember that Zhu Qing did not say that the Star Moon Palace was so terrifying back in the Bronze Pillar country. How would Zhu Qing know the details of the Star Moon Palace? Su Ji looked into the distance, still wanting to rush into the Yiqiong Heavenly Palace before the flying dagger immortal beast arrived. He only said casually, if you want to find opportunities in the Star Moon Palace, how can you not pay a price? Oh no. As he spoke, the 2 flying dagger immortal beasts in front of him suddenly accelerated and disappeared in a flash. At the same time, fiery red bubbles began to appear in the void in front of Xiao Hua and the others, like boiling water. Damn it! Fairy Xingyu cursed angrily. She rubbed her hands together in a hurry. Clusters of star-like mist mixed with brilliance fell into the void. Then, the rotating star shuttle suddenly exploded. Asterisk hong hong hong. Asterisk tens of thousands of star fragments rushed out of the star shuttle and fell towards the void, causing the surrounding space to collapse. At the same time, in front of the star fragment, layers of red flames surged out and enveloped an area of 100 miles. When the star shatter met the flames, it exploded everywhere. Fortunately, Fairy Xingyu was the first to react. The star shatter formed a kind of defense, blocking all the flames from reaching the crowd. However, in just a few breaths, a fierce aura rushed out from the flames in the distance. The space within hundreds of feet was extremely distorted. Then, the space cracked inch by inch like silk. Boom! With a loud bang, 3 sharp sword-like red claws stretched out, passing through the space and grabbing at Fairy Xingyue. Whoosh! Fairy Xingyue had been accumulating her strength for a long time. When she saw the sharp claws, she raised her hand without hesitation. Silver light rushed out from her body. Her saber, like a moon, cut across the sky and slashed at the 3 sharp claws. Clang! A golden sound suddenly rang out. Flames appeared on the flying dagger immortal beast's sharp claws. Layers of runes were split in half, and blood was faintly visible. Suddenly, with a roar, the flying dagger immortal beast's sharp mouth appeared in the space in front of Fairy Xingyue's chest. This sharp mouth broke through Fairy Xingyue's star moon saber at lightning speed and landed on Fairy Xingyue's heart. Be careful. Suji was shocked. Just as he was about to move his body, a fierce aura descended from the sky above his head, causing Suji's body to fall slightly. Go to the door first. Suji did not forget Xiao Hua, who was under him. With a wave of his arm, Xiao Hua flew out like a meteor. Suji had just thrown Xiao Hua out when 3 red claws formed a triangle and covered Suji in the sky. Even if Suji wanted to help Fairy Xingyue, he could not. However, at this moment, Fairy Xingyue waved her other hand again. Her saber was like a star, drawing a star curtain in front of the beast's mouth. Boom! The beast's mouth hit the star curtain and instantly broke it. Under this huge force, Fairy Xingyue's entire body flew out like a fallen leaf. Damn it! Suji was furious. The silver light around him shone brightly. Then, with a wave of his hands, layers of thunderbolts flew out like a tide and rushed high into the sky. The thunderbolts were like a tide, but the flying dagger immortal beast's sharp claws were like reef rocks. When they fell, they shattered the thunderbolts. The moment the thunderbolts blocked the flying dagger immortal beast, a dazzling thunderbolt flashed between Suji's eyebrows. Waves of thunderbolts flashed like spikes from within. When the ripples fell into the sky, the entire sky collapsed. An aura that was close to the will of heaven and earth overflowed from the collapse. As Suji grabbed between his eyebrows, a light as bright as a star appeared in his hand. The light pierced through all the darkness, and the vast aura instantly filled the entire space fragment. This is a punishment celestial weapon. Even though Xiaohua had already slowed down in midair and was about to descend, he could still easily identify the origin of the immortal artifact in Suji's hand when the powerful aura of justice, fairness, and justice rushed past him. He could not help but groan and look up at Suji. In the light and shadow, a punishment celestial weapon that looked like a spear appeared. The spear looked like it was only 8 feet long, but the light and shadow vaguely seemed to be submerged in the void. Endless thunderbolts appeared in the spear, and thousands of thunderbolts that revealed supreme majesty overflowed on the surface of the spear. Suji held the spear, and without any hesitation, he stabbed it toward the top of his head. Where the spear landed, the entire space was pierced, and the space within 100 miles was also transparent. In this transparent space, another flying dagger immortal beast could be seen, and a terrifying expression appeared on its ferocious face. However, the punishment celestial weapon only pierced a few feet. Ka-ka-ka. A burst of ear-piercing cracking sounds came from Suji's body. The armor on Suji's body broke, and pieces of flesh burst out from the armor. Even the space between Suji's eyebrows had a bloodstain that looked like a thunderbolt. In the bloodstain, white bones could be seen. Humph! Suji coldly snorted, and his hand that was controlling the punishment celestial weapon did not stop. He did not care about the collapse of his body at all. He wanted to kill the flying dagger immortal beast before he was powerless. Unfortunately, wishes were always beautiful, and the things in the world would never change because of true feelings. The punishment celestial weapon only pierced another 10 feet before the thunderbolts around it were gradually extinguished. The soaring aura was also contained within the spear. What was special was that the spear rapidly shrank until it was less than a few inches long, and it automatically fell between Suji's eyebrows. Aogg. The flying dagger immortal beast that almost died in the punishment celestial weapon suddenly let out a roar. It didn't escape, but it charged out from the void towards Suji. Suji hurriedly waved his hand, and a spear-like celestial weapon appeared in his hand. Woo! He stabbed at the flying dagger immortal beast. Suji rarely showed his skills, but this spear was amazing. Although the celestial weapon didn't have much celestial spiritual energy, it still dodged the flying dagger immortal beast's attack and stabbed into the flying dagger immortal beast's body from a strange angle. Boom! The flying dagger immortal beast roared angrily. Thousands of flames appeared on its scales and instantly wrapped around the celestial weapon. Moreover, the flying dagger immortal beast's huge tail swept up a gust of wind and hit Suji's back.